Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku was reincarnated as a doomed villain? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Izuku opened his eyes, squinting a bit as he looks up at the mobile hanging above his crib. He blinks a couple of times, reaching up slightly to grab at the shapes above him gently blowing above him. Ah, he's awake, a voice says, causing the baby boy to look over at the maid who ran her fingers through his curly green hair. Hello, Lord Izuku, she smiled. Izuku Midoriya, that was him now, or that's what he could come up with since it was the only name he had been ref to for the last 2 weeks he had been alive. He couldn't remember his old name, but everything else was clear. Growing up, he had always believed that after you die, there was nothing, so he was more than a little shocked when he opened his eyes the first time and saw a green-haired woman rocking him in her arms. The last thing he remembered before that was him bleeding out in an always. He always thought when people get reincarnated that they would forget about their past lives. But that was not the strangest part. From what he could piece together due to the gossip of his nurses and maids was that this was not the world he once knew. The clothing style was different, and there was no technology. When it finally clicked, it had been when he heard his mother's name, Lady Inko. The name sounded familiar. It was from a book he had read in his past life, and because of this, he was not so happy to be Izuku now. In the book, Izuku is seen as one of the minor villains. Because of the lack of love he received from his parents, he clung to any sort of affection. That made him seem weird and obsessive, and so that's what he became. It was sad, really. He was to be killed by one of the male leads, which so happened to be one of the love interests of the heroine of the book. When he was 19 years old, he will be killed by the tyrannical knight, Lord Katsuki Baku. Izuku didn't want to die, and most importantly, he didn't want to be the villain of this story, much less a minor one. So, he made a plan. Instead of acting dull and letting jealousy be the driving force of his actions, he would grow up to appease people. He wanted to make people like him and, if he could, avoid the main cast of the story. Prince Todoroki Shoto, the heroine Ochako Uraraka, the Red Dragon, Kirishima Aijuru, the other minor roles that play a part in the cast, and most importantly, Bakugo Katsuki. He still had a long time to plan. Ochako shouldn't arrive until he was 18. All he had to do for now was sit back, drink milk, get strong, and avoid trouble. It's not like it was going to go right to his doorstep. He was perfectly fine. He had 2 options, survive and keep going as is, or if the situation is looking grim, take a small fortune and run off. He still had a lot to learn about this land. In the book, he knew there were 5 kingdoms in the surrounding area. He lived in the kingdom of Yue. People possessed magic that they could learn and master as far as Izuku knew. He had none since it was never brought up in the book, but he could learn. After all, he had 18 years to master it for defense against Katsuki. The door opened once again, and Izuku expected it had to be time for his meal. He didn't think his visitor would be his mother or his father. They were far too busy to come and check on their one and only son. Well, his father was, though he knew he would never meet his mother again. She was not of pure blood, not from a rich family. She had been a maid, and since his father did not have an heir, he was aware that was why Izuku was still alive. His mother had died while giving birth. By all rights, he was a disgrace to the Midoriya household. He looked up to see red eyes peering back at him. This wasn't right. As he got a better look at the boy, something about this was unsettling to him. Is this a potato? The boy asks with a small, unpleased look on his face. He looked to be around 2 or 3 years old. He had spiky blonde hair and pretty blood-red eyes. Ah, no, Lord Katsuki, this is no vegetable, his maid said. This is Lord Izuku Midoriya. He's just small now, but one day he will grow. Even you were this small once, she says with a small smile. Katsuki, Lord Katsuki, this wasn't in the book. Was he to die now at the hands of a child? This was the man that would kill him. This part was supposed to be easy. Avoid the guy and he would have been fine, but no. He just had to go and see the guy. A small hand reached down and held Izuku's neck. Even if Katsuki was so small now, he could easily kill the green-haired child, and his maid was in no position to stop him. Izuku closed his eyes slightly, so he was looking at the boy through his eyelids, and he reached up slightly, wrapping his small fingers around the boy's thumb. After a few seconds, the grip on his neck softened. "Ah, my lord, do be careful, babies are delicate," she says. "Would you like to hold him?" she asks, and Katsuki only huffed, turning away and walking out without another word. What a strange day. He didn't know why, but in the next 2 weeks, the blonde boy continued to return to his side, if not just to look at him for a while. Izuku hated how useless he dealt. He couldn't even roll over because his head was so dim and big compared to his body. Izuku looks at the red-eyed boy once again next to him, though he was seated on a chair. "I want to hold him," the boy says with a curt tone. Izuku's eyes widen. His nurse wouldn't let this tyrannical child hold him. That was insane. But he felt a pair of arms lift him up. The green-haired boy kicked his legs slightly, but his baby strength was no use. He was placed into the boy's arms, and his lip quivered slightly, though he would not cry. The blonde looked down at him and he huffed. "My name is Katsuki, you're kind of useless, you know that? That's why I'm going to call you Deku," he says, "and you have to listen to me." Those words were so familiar. Cold, empty green eyes looked into glowing red ones, red orbs that shined with untamed fire in them. The green-haired boy leaned against the wall, a hand over the wound in his side as a small smile lingers on his face. He was born into the world a bastard, his unpure blood stained on his murderer's hands. "Why do you laugh? It's quite funny? Are you still so useless you wag your tail like an obedient dog even as I stand before you with blade in hand? You know what they say, one born into the world unloved from its first breath will die with the same fate," he says. "Go to hell," the blonde hissed, holding up his sword. "I'll see you there." But now all Izuku could do was look at the boy's eyes, filled with childhood innocence. He would not face the same fate as the book described he would. No, he would make them love him, care for him, so even the thought of harming him would he frowned upon. He didn't want to be the villain of this story. Izuku let out a small coo as he gave an open-mouthed smile, and he reached up, pressing his hand against the blonde's cheek. Rule 1 of not being a minor villain: stay in the shadows, avoid confrontation, and calm people down if it gets riled up. The villain is always fueled by their past, so if he could have a happy childhood, then that would never be an issue. Instead of being a bother to Katsuki, could he try being like a younger brother? And that started with him being absolutely adorable. The blonde may not show it, but Target 1 has been captured. It had been 3 months since he had captured Katsuki. More or less, he just wanted the boy to not hate him. But now he was coming all the time to see him. Well, it wasn't all bad, he had been growing fine, he could roll over on his stomach now, though it was a hassle. To be honest, he was even starting to eat solid foods more or less. Izuku laid on his stomach, his wind pressed against the mattress as he looked over at the large window. He more or less understood more things about the story like he had been trying to do. Katsuki was over so much because he was being trained by one of his father's staff. Even if he was 2, it was just lessons. For now, Izuku would never be able to pick up a sword like that. Yes, he was a male, but he was learning about dynamics. Izuku was going to be an Omega. He knew he would be, of course. His father had not come to visit, he had not presented yet, but there were small hints that you could tell. He already had a calmer nature. Even with toys, he did not put them in his mouth, and he did not cry all that much. But again, he could be a beta. Even if he was a beta, that would be a shame on the family. Izuku had always kept his secondary gender a secret in the book, so he really had no idea. Katsuki walked into the nursery, and he hummed, looking at the baby. "How long has he been turned over?" he asks, a bit of a temper flaring from the young alpha. The maid looked at him, and she bows her head slightly. "About 10 minutes, she says. "I wanted to watch," he says. Yep, this was Katsuki. He didn't seem like the type of guy in the book. Sure, he was borderline crazy already, but he was small and young. But he never thought the other boy would show any kind of interest in him whatsoever. The maid apologized as Izuku, with all his might, pushed his small body to flop over and lay back down on his back. He let out a deep breath because, well, that was his workout for the day. He looked over at the door as it opened once again and a man walked in. He did not recognize him. Who was this guy? The male peered over the side of the crib. He had curly black hair and dark green eyes. Izuku looked back into those eyes and he proceeded to fit his fist into his mouth. The man hummed a bit and looked at Katsuki, who had straightened his posture when the guy came in. Katsuki, shouldn't you be with your tutor? He asks. He huffed a bit and looked at his shoes. I finished all my lessons, Mr. Midoriya, he says, crossing his arms. So this was his father. He had finally shown his face after all of these long months. Izuku was not impressed. For once he didn't want Katsuki to go and leave him with this man, the man that never paid any attention to him, the man who never had once nice thing to say. He wanted him to leave and yet he still had to try and change fate. Perhaps he could melt the boy's heart. Katsuki walked out, leaving them alone, and Izuku reached up, grabbing at the man. His father just looked at him coldly and he paid no mind to the green-haired boy. He turned then and went to sit in a chair, and he looked at the crib. For what felt like hours, he sat there looking at his father who didn't even do anything but ask questions once in a while. Is he progressing well? The deep voice asks. Yes, my lord, he is meeting all of the growth points for his age. He can roll over and he smiles quite a lot. He's even starting to eat solid foods, she says. His father nodded and stood up, walking back, so he was above him. Smile, he says to the baby. Izuku blinks. Was this guy serious? Did he think a baby would be able to understand what this man was asking him to do? Izuku coos softly and he shoved his fist back in his mouth. His father hummed before he walked out of the room. Huh, take that, Izuku thought proudly as he chewed at his fist. It was looking like Plan B was going to be the best option. He would take as much money as he could and book it. He would survive in this world, no matter what. But for now, he just wanted to be able to turn over without getting exhausted. Izuku remembered the first time he had read the novel. He was a broke college student. He had found the book on a park bench and being curious he had picked it up. The main character of the book was Uraraka Ochako. She was a girl who lived out on the country. After some attacks from the demon population, some of the knights came to check out the area. Uraraka proceeded to save a young knight, Katsuki Bakugu. She went back to the capital with him and the dragon knight Karishma, where she encounters the prince. There proceeds to be drama and romance. And of course what lead up to his death. Izuku in the book had a distaste for Uraraka. She who so happened to be a commoner could somehow get the love and attention from everyone. After a ball, Izuku had tried to attack the girl, but she got saved by Bakugu, who had been rather cold to the brunette before that point. The book was not from Izuku's perspective, so you had to read in between the lines to even be able to remotely sympathize with his character. Hell, even Izuku did not like his character, and if he survived, how would the book continue? Would Ochako still meet the mysterious Shinso? That was another sad plot point for a character Izuku liked, a boy named Denki Kaminari. He was a stable boy at the palace, and completely in love with the purple-haired boy. Shinso rejected him though in the story, and would the book even lead to the end? The defeat of the demon lord? The boy let out a small sigh as he looks out the window. Being in this world for 6 months let him do a lot of thinking. Since he couldn't communicate that well, he had been observing. He hoisted himself up, so he was seated, and he essayed on the pacifier he had been given. He just wanted to be able to go outside, and it so happens that his wish would be answered. He felt 2 hands wrap around him as he was picked up. Since he was older now, he had 2 maids instead of a swarm of them. He blinks a couple of times, and he gave a small smile. Now, my lord, I suppose it is time for a stroll, she says with a smile. Izuku adored this woman since she was the closest thing to a mother he had. She had her black hair tucked neatly into a bun, her dress had no wrinkles, and she didn't mind his drool. Izuku had been quiet. Most babies were full of babbles and so on, but Izuku hadn't even attempted to speak other than a few times here and there. If he didn't talk, he didn't have to get as much attention. He closed his eyes as they walked outside. The sun was too bright in his opinion. He was soon set on a picnic blanket, and a few toys were placed in front of him. Really all he wanted was a nice book, though he had once looked over at the storybook his maid had been reading him, though the letters didn't look like Japanese, which he remembered from his past life. His past life. He remembered more and more through all of the faces were blurry. He had lived more than one though. He could remember a total of 3. His one as a lonely boy in his 20s, an orphan with no one to love. Another being his time as a woman in a resistance against the capital. She had been shot and killed, and another, a sick child, dying from a sickness which shook a nation. All of them seemed dull and bad. Couldn't he just have a good life? Izuku looked at his maid, who was reading quietly to herself. Izuku needed some time alone, and since he had begun crawling he got on his hands and knees and moved behind some bushes. He looked over at something quite fluffy, and he made his way over to it. He liked to think of himself as an expert at this. He sat back and pressed his hand to the fluffy object, but when he heard a groan, he moved his hand. It was a man, and not even an awake one. Who was this guy? He keeps patting his hand against the boy's light blue head until red eyes look at him. Sensei's heir, he murmurs as he sat up. His dad wasn't a teacher, and wait. Sensei was a Japanese word. And as far as he knew, this was not Japan. He believed what stood out most about this boy was the small horns growing from his head, a demon. Why did a demon know his father, and why was a demon here? Izuku let out a small babble then, and it made the boy give him a confused face. He glanced over at the chessboard. Now that was something he knew how to do, so this guy liked games. He moved to it and he grabbed a piece. His mortar skills were not the best, but he could kind of put things down. Wah? Izuku blurts. The boy blinks a few times and he hummed, "You're just a baby, there is no way you would be able to play," the blue-haired boy says as he crossed his arms, but he does move another piece out of pure curiosity of what the baby would do. Next, you see Tamura Shigaraki was a guy who enjoyed games, and he wanted to see where this would go. Izuku looks at him, and he moved another piece clumsily, and he whined a bit as it fell over. God damn it. This continued for a while before Izuku hears his maid calling his name. He looked behind him, but when he looked back, he saw that the boy was gone. The only thing remaining from the interaction was a pawn in his hand. He had been playing white. His maid stumbled through the bushes, and when she found him, she let out a relieved sigh. "Oh my, Izuku, you can't just wander off like that. You could have gotten hurt," she says as she picks him up. "Maybe it will be best to keep you inside a while longer," she says. Izuku looked out of his window. The boy held onto an armchair as he supported himself up. His legs wobbled as he took each step, and even as he stood there still and unmoving, he loved how the sun was just about to be below the high mountains surrounding the large kingdom. He let go of the armchair and fell on his butt. He started to tear up, and it led to a loud wail coming from the boy. He had started to cry more, but it wasn't like he could help it. When he just fell over, he would burst into tears. He was 9 months old. He had spent 9 months with no words, 9 months with not being able to do anything himself, but if he could just learn how to walk. "Oh no, you fell again," his maid says as she picked him up, and Katsuki, who had been sitting there, huffed. "Why do you still let him walk around like that? He keeps falling over." "It's how babies learn, my lord. He's fine, see? He already stopped crying," she says as she sets the green-haired boy back down. He knew Katsuki would still try to resist this idea, so he attempted to walk once again, and he waddled over, so he was right in front of Katsuki. Big green innocent eyes looked into red ones. Katsuki only smiled, and he gave the small boy a pat on the head. "Yeah, you know he won't need to be doing all that running around. I know the old man hates it, but he's gonna go ahead and play with dolls and wear nice things. He's going to grow up to be spoiled and pampered until he gets sold off because of God demanded money," he says. "Damn fool." Izuku thought Katsuki was too mature than he should be. Back in his old life, small kids would go play soccer in the park or have a playgroup. Katsuki was starting to learn how to use a sword, and the boy already knew how to read. Katsuki was amazing. He learned quickly and was very skilled in the book if it wasn't for that bad attitude. "Don't worry yourself with the likes of that. My lord will make sure Yuzuku will be provided for when he is of age. You know, he does come every other day, and at night he will just check to see if he's breathing. He doesn't know how to show proper affection, but he will, eventually," the maid says. Izuku was a bit confused in the book. Izuku was, in fact, an Omega, but he wore male clothes. But from what he has experienced, he is always dressed in frilly baby things that aren't the most comfortable. Hell, he looked like a baby girl. He understood why Izuku liked to wear male clothing. People thought he was a beta. Katsuki huffed as he pushed Yuzuku off, and he looked at the boy fall back on his bum. "Don't grow up too fast, you hear me, Deku? The faster you do, the faster you'll meet creepy old geezers who want to take you away," Katsuki says. Sometimes he wondered if Katsuki knew that babies couldn't communicate, and Yuzuku still refused to speak. And he wouldn't for a good while longer because talking is what gets people in trouble. Life had been more or less simple in the time Yusuke had been staying at the manor where his family name resided. By the time he was 1 year old, B had seen his father 3 or 4 times. Most children would mind, but having grown up with it in his past life, he didn't know any better. Though he did miss many things from his old life, he missed technology. The closest thing to a camera in this time was a magic cube that could take recordings or pictures, but there were no games or anything. Izuku would have rather been raised by wolves and then become an adventurer, but instead, he was stuck in itchy, frilly clothing and blocks to play with, though finally being a year old had perks. One of these perks included taking off his socks whenever they would be put on. He hated them, and now he could finally remove them whenever he pleased. He was currently stumbling around the halls of the manor. He didn't mind when he fell or anything, but when people were around he would whimper a bit. He had to keep up the act of having the mind of a child. Could you imagine if someone thought a baby had the knowledge possessed by a fully functional human? He stumbled by a slightly open door, and he paused, hearing some murmuring coming from the room. He slumped down on his butt, and he scooted himself a bit closer to the door so he could get a better listen. You are aware that you have a son, even if he is not of pure blood, he is half yours, a voice says. Izuku could see purple smoke, but there was no fire. Instead, a man stood there. It was a bit intimidating that his father would be talking to a demon, but it didn't make sense. Izuku in the book never interacted with monsters. This man must be cursed then. Yes, cursed. He knew his father was not a good man, but he wouldn't interact with the novel's main threat. Kurogyari, don't lecture me about my parenting skills. All I am planning on doing is using him for political gain. The child is of no importance to me. He is the reason Inko is dead, and Shigaraki has already interacted with the boy, his father says. What if he were to act as an anchor? The way your brother gave you a goal, if Shigaraki had someone to protect, let it be a brother or cousin or even Finase, wouldn't that spark his drive for dash? He paused and looked over at the door. It seems we have a spy, he says, walking over and picking up Izuku. Izuku looked up at the man, and he swatted at where the guy's head would be, but it went right through. His father sighed as he looks at the green-haired baby. Maybe you are right, and since you are correct, maybe until further notice, I would put you in charge as his nurse until I can find a replacement, Hisashi says. Replacement? The mist man asks. It seems that Yusuke's nurse has been stealing from our funds, and she knows too much. With the king being close by, I suggest she was plotting for treason. She is to be executed. So we need a new guardian for Yusuke. The king suggested Eraserhead, though the knight was clearly incapable, and so I am finding someone. I don't believe it is wise, he says. Just until further notice, Shigaraki will have to leave soon as well. I can't keep the boy here, so you will be taking him to the South Mountains, but until then you're my son's nanny, he says. Yes, master, Kurogyari says. Izuku was then passed over to his father, and he looked up at the man. This was the first time he had been held by him, but more importantly, his nanny was being killed? For nothing. He was more or less baffled about the whole why the Shigaraki guy needed a best friend or brother or whatever. Izuku looks his father in the eye, and he pressed his small hand against the man's cheek, cooing a bit before he started to squirm as he attempted to be freed from the older man's hold. I'll be taking my son along with me for the rest of the day, he says as he looks at the mist man, who nodded, and he walked off only after bowing. Who was that guy? His temporary nanny for sure, but other than that, what was he to his father? You look just like her, his father says with cold eyes as he felt big fingers run through his messy green hair. You know it's your fault she has passed on, though it is to be mistaken since you were against my will. I was going to kill you too back then, but I didn't. I was never going to marry in the first place, so when it was brought to my attention that I had a son, well, I was swayed to keep you as an heir. You can't understand me, so why am I talking to a baby, he says with a sigh as he placed him down on the couch in the room and he looks at the baby. Izuku sat there in awkward silence. Why did he have to be born into this family? Weeks passed, and Yusuke had not seen much of his father. He had seen him in passing sometimes, but that was it. Being taken care of by Kurogyari was interesting. He did do everything diligently, and Izuku never had to whine or cry for anything. It was like the man could tell what he would want before he wanted it. By the time he was 1.5 years old, he did favor this man out of all the people who would come and visit him. Izuku stumbled across his room, and he wrapped his arms around the mist man's leg. pulling on his pants slightly. Kiji, he says happily. He could not pronounce the man's name no matter how hard he tried, so the best thing he could do was give a diminutive nickname and say Kiji was the best he could do with the man's complicated name. Hello young master, what should we do today? He asks as he looks at him, and Izuku points to the chair, which was the chair where Kurogiri would read, which meant he wanted to be read to. Kurogiri shakes his head. Young master, you know you have to use your words. If you ever want to be taken seriously, you need to speak, he says. I want to read, he says with big eyes. When he was picked up, he let out a small giggle. He enjoyed the clothes he got to wear at this stage in his life. His play clothes were comfortable. It was a loose white shirt with some overalls, and of course, he had socks. It was comfortable, but when anyone of importance came by, even if he were not to be seen by them, he would have to dress well. This meant that uncomfortable frilly things were back on the menu. He was sitting on the older man's lap, and he laid his head down as the other opened an old book and began to read. The story was about a pretty lady who fell for a poor merchant's son. It was short and sweet, and Izuku craved stories like that. He always had liked those kinds of fables and tales, especially in his previous life. This was nice, and he never wanted it to end. He had not seen Shigaraki since that last meeting, so the chances of him meeting the boy once again were slim. But alas, these peaceful days would not last much longer. Izuku stood peeking out of the doorway into his father's office. He saw Kurogiri and Shigaraki standing there. He was 2 years old, he had grown up since that last year, and he immensely enjoyed his time. Izuku, what have I told you about spying? It makes you seem like a rat, and what do we do to rats? They get found and slaughtered then thrown out. His father spoke without even having to look at him. Izuku steps out of his hiding spot, and he looks at the men in front of him. I'm sorry, sir, he says. He had a toy rabbit in his hands that possessed a green bow around its neck. His father sighed. I guess you came at a good time. It's time to say goodbye to Shigaraki and Kurogiri, he says, and Izuku's eyes widen. He looks at Kurogiri since he wanted him to say it wasn't true. He sniffled a bit as he began to tear up. He was always a crybaby, and that was never going to change. Going to come back though, you're going to come back, Kiji? He asks as he looks at the mist man who knelt down and looked at the young lord. Kiji, he asks. Nothing was said between the two, but a few moments later, he stood up and walked to Shigaraki, who placed a hand on his shoulder, and they disappeared. Izuku looks at the grandfather clock. His legs were propped up against the wood as his back was pressed against the wooden floor of his bedroom. His green eyes followed the clock's hands as they moved every second. He rolled over, and he propped himself up on his knees before hoisting himself up. He ran to the window, climbing on the window chair, and peeked through the glass. Katsuki had not been coming over as much as he had. The boy had been starting lessons, so there had been fewer visits. He had still never been out of the grounds of the Midoriya Manor. He thought children were supposed to see the world, go to the beach, and see children his age. He folded his hands along the windowsill, and he huffed a bit. 3 years old and bored, even in his past life, he had more freedom than this. It wasn't really the preferred kind since he had been left to roam the streets all night and get into trouble, but still, it was freedom. He felt as if he were a bird in a cage, locked away from the world only to be looked at. And yet, he sometimes forgets that he is not even in control of his own life. He had been thinking about it, and Katsuki's distaste for him was reasonable. That's why they had stopped spending time together. What's wrong, Izuku? Are you tired? Your nap is not for another hour, but we can push it back if you are sleepy, his nurse says. His nurse. She was the same woman whose milk he had drank from. You see, a nurse was a full-time nanny. She had been PRGN&T at the same time as Inko had been, so she had provided milk for Izuku since his mother could not. Now she was his nanny. Her son was old enough not to need constant supervision, but apparently Izuku required it. He shakes his head and he sighed. No, thank you, ma'am, he says as he looks at his shoes. Being polite was required. Izuku in the book was not polite, throwing fits and bad-mouthing people, so Izuku made it a point to be polite to everyone. If he were seen as weak, he would not be targeted as a threat. Izuku rubbed his wrist before he stood up. Hana, he asks, can we go outside? He asks, near the pond. I want to see the ducklings, he claims. Spring was lovely, his favorite time of the year, no doubt. She smiled and nodded as she takes his tiny hands and she leads him down the path. When they got to a nice spot, she set down a blanket and smiled. "I am going to play," he says before running off behind the bushes. He hummed as he pushed leaves out of his face and a small smile painted itself on his face. He wrapped his fingers around the fence, looking out into the road which leads to the city. He was small enough to sneak through, but he never dared. He dug around in his pockets and pulled out a couple of slices of bread from his breakfast. "Are you here?" he called out, closing his eyes as he waits and listens. Slight shuffling came from nearby bushes, and Izuku smiled, holding out the slices of bread. His arms dangled outside the fence as he waited. Black hair appeared as a boy walked out of the bushes. The boy was dirty with twigs in his hair and mud on his face. This boy did not speak much, his clothes were dirty, and he was clearly poor and starving. The worst part was Izuku knew who this boy would become. Kirishima Idru had lived in a small town near UA. He had dragon blood in him like many people in the region. He went by many names, the Dragon Knight or the Red Knight. Some called him Lord Katsuki's loyal mutt, with good reason. The currently black-haired boy would have his town destroyed. He had become a pickpocket and would get into some trouble with guards in the capital. Katsuki would spare his life if the male became his partner in crime. Best friends who fought for the same honor, and another male lead fighting for Lady Ochako's heart soon as well. The male started devouring the bread, and Izuku smiled. "You're hungry today, huh?" he asks as he looks at him, and he smiled. "I'm sorry, I would have brought more. Still, my pockets aren't so big, so I couldn't carry much," the small boy says. He was a year away from when kids his age started developing magical abilities. He knew he would not. Though he would not let that stop him. No matter how many good foods or nice things he was exposed to, he still had a plan. And that plan was his only hope of survival. He had been hiding small stuff in his room for his grand escape, but he would use some things he had pleasures of to help the needy for now. "You still haven't told me your name, and I've seen you every day for 2 whole weeks, Izuku says, looking at him. He knew the fucker's name, but the boy wouldn't even tell him. The black-haired boy shook his head, and Izuku only smiled. "Well, it's okay, I suppose. What use is there begging? I will just call you UM.UM, he hummed, trying to think. "How about?" He was going to keep speaking, but he was interrupted. Kirishima Idru, the male says, his mouth full of bread. Izuku smiled as he nodded his head. "I'll call you AG, he smiled. "Or is that too forward? For now, it can be Kiri," he says. More freely in front of this boy because he knew he wouldn't remember by the time he stopped coming. He did still keep the talking to basic 3-year-old style back when he was with Hana or any of the staff. Even Katsuki, who he had dubbed Kaken, as soon as he could pronounce it well enough. The black-haired boy nodded before grabbing a small pebble and placing it in the green-haired boy's hand. His pebbles. And he had grown in the collection every day the other would visit. They would trade food for a stone in return. "Thank you, Kiri," he says as he looks at him. "Stay safe, okay?" he asks as he waved off, and he smiled at the boy before turning to leave and make his way back to his nurse. "Bye. Zuzu," he says as he watched the boy walk off. Izuku let out a strangled cough as he sits up with the support of Hana. He had gained a high fever the night before, his whole body was hot, and he could barely breathe. "That it use Kadero, how did this even happen?" she asks as she rubbed the boy's back before laying him back down and setting a new wet cloth against his forehead. Izuku didn't respond. He was so tired, but he couldn't sleep if he tried. He would be awakened by his own choking. He didn't think he was going to die, not this early, but medicine was not something people knew about much, and a child getting ill was a death sentence for most. "It hurts," he murmurs as he looks at her with lazy eyes, and she nodded. "Daddy, that I want my daddy," he says quietly. He didn't know why he was longing for a man who probably couldn't care less about his sickness. "Your father is here, my lord," she says. "He just has very important work and dash." The door burst open, and his father stood there fuming. He walked over to the bed, and he softened as he saw the pathetic boy laying there. He sighed and he sits down in the chair, holding the boy's small hand in his. "I've cancelled my meetings," he says darkly, reaching over and brushing a thick green curl from the male's face. "Make some tea, Hana," he says, and she nodded, scurrying out of the room. "Children that are so weak," his father says. "You will be okay, you are a Midoriya, and if you pass on you will be fine as well," he says, and he glared slightly at the warmth radiating off his skin. Izuku shivers slightly, and he let out more wheezes and coughs. He heard his father sighed, and he felt a dip in the bed as his father wrapped his arms around the boy holding him before he began rocking him slightly as his nannies would do. Just sleep, there you go, have nice dreams and you will feel better soon, his father says. Izuku pressed his chubby cheek against the male's chest, and he started to doze. There you go, my son. Strangely, as he fell asleep, he realized he had a father. When Izuku had woken up the morning after he had fallen sick, everything felt strange. From then on, things had been turning out different than what he had been expecting. For starters, when he had awoken, his father had his arms wrapped around the boy and had actually spent the night in his bed with him. With the weeks that followed, he would check in and even invite Izuku to tea in the garden. At first, it was a bit awkward. They both didn't know how to communicate with each other like rational people, but after a couple of days they had figured it out. But as the months passed, Izuku knew this wouldn't last for one reason and one reason alone. Izuku would never be able to be the heir his father would want. The kind of heir that any lord would want, for a matter of fact. He was an Omega for starters. Who would ever trust him with making choices that could impact people's lives? Second, he would never develop the natural ability to use magic. It would be so easy for others like Katsuki, who was said to thrive from his powerful explosion magic. But Izuku was determined to be able to make his way in life, and he could still learn magic after all. He could look at some spell books and hopefully not end up useless and dead by Katsuki's hands. The green-haired boy did not know if he should be thankful or scared that his future killer had been coming less. But what could he do? He was so young that he couldn't even reach the door handle. The green-haired boy yawned as he dragged his stuffed rabbit across the floor of the king hallways. It was dark. He has always tried to stay away from it. Walking alone through the manor at night was scary enough, but most of the maids were asleep anyway. He was dressed in a simple nightdress with a light green ribbon that hung from the middle of his collar. The skirt went down to his ankles and it restricted some movement. The rabbit he held was a gift from Kurogiri when he had his birthday a couple of years back. The boy rubbed his eyes. He had forgotten where he was going, to begin with, though, but he had woken from a nightmare and didn't want to be alone at the moment. He hummed as he walked past his father's office. He glanced at the door and he saw a blue glowing light coming from the room. He had heard his father claim multiple times for him to never enter his study at night or when the door was closed, but who could blame him for his childlike wonder? He was 3 after all. The green-haired boy padded into the room and he looked around. His father was gone for sure, maybe in bed or drinking coffee, but he was not in the room. He glanced at the floorboards and he jumped twice, heeding the difference from the left side of the room from the right. He pushed the rug out of the way and he looks down to see the glowing light coming from the hidden passageway. He gulped as he closed his eyes and he tried to think of the best thing he could do. He didn't know if it would be wise to go down there, but he ignored his gut feelings to try and find his father. He opens the door with much difficulty and he let out a couple of deep huffs when he has. A staircase? He watched the door carefully and he pulled up his dress slightly and began to walk down the steps. Before he could make it even 3 steps down, 2 arms wrapped should his middle and lifted him up. What are you doing down there, Izuku? What did I tell you? His father says in a harsh tone that brought the poor Omega child to tears. I'm sorry, Daddy. I couldn't find you and he sniffles as he wiped his eyes with his hands. His father's features soften slightly and he pats his head. I'm sorry, I won't do it again, I'm sorry, Izuku whimpers as his father walked out of the office, closing and locking the door behind him. It's okay, Izuku, his father says as he lays him down his bed and he gets in as well. He hummed as he roughed the small boy's hair. Why didn't you get Hana? She's not you, Izuku says as he hugged his bunny. I miss Kaken, and everyone else, Izuku says, and his father hummed, thinking for a few moments. Let's just say his father had the whole situation covered. 3 days after that night, Izuku came face to face with a big black wolf dog. Izuku looked at his father curiously, then back at the dog show as wagging its tail happily. What's his name? Izuku asks as he rubbed the dog all over. Really, Izuku was a very small child, meaning his new friends looked huge, conspired to him. That's for you to choose, his father said. Izuku's smile just grew and he thought as the dog started to lick his face. How about Cerberus? Izuku says, since the dog remedied him of Greek mythology and the 3-headed dog of hell. How did you know of that name? His father asks and Izuku only smiled, trying to think of a way to get out of this. I heard about it on a book, he says as he blushed slightly. He was a terrible liar. Okay Izuku, listen, Cerberus here is to protect you. He will keep you company even at night, though do not let him see blood, his father said, and Izuku nodded, smiling happily. Cerberus, I think you and I will be friends, he says with a bright smile. When Izuku was 4 years old, his life did not crash and burn like he had thought it would from the moment he realized who he was and what he was doing in this world. It started with a man coming over and giving him tests. He knew the answer already. He was nothing but a human with no magic at all, and Omega to top it off. He had been told he would never have magic ability, though his father didn't seek to mind. How odd. What alpha would even want to mate with a quirk-less Omega like Izuku? I heard he's like that because it's a curse from the gods above. His mother was not noble, you know? I heard she was a maid. He really is just a dumb Deku. With the 3 holy spirits, magic, fate and power, I never asked to be like this. I never asked to be born. So why can't I have him? You have all of them tied around your pretty little finger, Ochako. Why I gave you which? Izuku had screamed as he shoved the brown-haired woman against the wall in a fit of rage. He would never fall for someone like him, you, cruel of heart, a soul as black as the devil himself. Izuku, snap out of it, will ya? The blonde 6-year-old yelled as he flicked the 4-year-old in the arm. Come on, let's go, okay? He says with a smile as he steps out of the carriage and held out his hand for the boy, who took it and smiled. Sorry Kaken, I got distracted, Izuku says as he steps out of the carriage and he looks at the city of UA. He smiled. No matter what would happen, he could enjoy the moment as it was, couldn't he? Izuku smiled as he takes the blonde boy's hand and he steps out of the carriage. His eyes glimmered as he looks around, and he smiled happily. It was so weird but pretty at the same time. The town was bustling with life. Women walked holding rowdy children, knights patrolled the streets, and people sold goods in their stands and stores. Izuku had never officially been out, but now that he had reached the age of 4, it was time for him to see the world. And that meant a day of fun on a summer afternoon with Katsuki and, well, some maids following behind them. The green-haired boy wore a white button-up shirt with a gray-green vest and gray pants, and brown shoes. He looked around as he held onto the boy's hand tightly, a bit wary that he could get lost in the sea of people. What do you want to see first, Deku? Katsuki asks as he looks at the small boy. Izuku looks at him, and he hummed. He had been thinking about what he could possibly do to get to a magic store. He wanted to start off early. Though magic was generally elemental, he knew if he could start off with some simple spells, he could eventually be powerful enough to beat the crap out of his best friend when it came time for him to die. The magic, Izuku says, bouncing a little in place as he pulled on the blonde's hand. Katsuki hummed and nodded. He walked to a small store, and it was oddly girlish. Not to say women couldn't be mighty warriors, because they very much could be. There was a knight in this world who was known as the Army's Rabbit, though she was way more brutal than she seemed and honestly remarkable. What he meant was it was pink with flowers and so on. Izuku looked at the blonde with an unimpressed look because this was not what he wanted. He wanted the type that students of the UA school went to for supplies and what wizards and witches got their things from. Not this crap. Don't look at me like that, Deku. My mom said that a lot of Omegas like this stuff. You can get a cute little familiar of something. Katsuki says. Izuku furrowed his brows. He wanted the real thing. Just because he was magicless didn't mean he wanted this. Izuku wanted to go to magic school, he wanted to learn among the great knights, and he wanted to go. Of course, there were downsides to going to school at the castle. More rivals would be there, like Prince Todoroki and Katsuki, hell Kirishima too. I want to go to a real magic shop, Izuku whined as he was dragged inside of the store, and Izuku blinks a couple of times before he pouts and lets go of the blonde's hand. How about this? Katsuki says, picking up a red ribbon and holding it up. He smiled. Hey, look at this. It changes colors, isn't that cool, right? He asks as he looks at the green-haired boy. Izuku shakes his head as he walks off to a different side of the store, and he waits for Katsuki to get sick of looking around the shop. He hummed as he looks out of the store, and he sees a figure in a dark cloak walking past people. Izuku looked at Katsuki and the maids. and they seemed to be keeping themselves busy with looking for things to appease the young lord. Izuku stepped out of the store, and he started walking between people. "Excuse me." "Pardon me," he says as he walks. He saw the figure turn a corner, and as Izuku turned the same corner, he came face to face with a brick wall. He hummed as he tilted his head to the side, and he pressed his small hands against the brick wall. He moved his hands across the wall until it hit a small bump and the door opened, and he took a small step back. He looks at the dark tunnel. He bit his bottom lip, wondering if he should even go in, but after a few moments, he decided it was a good idea and he walked in. The door closed behind him, and he was in pitch black. After a few seconds, blue fire lit the tunnel wall, and he started walking until there was an opening and his jaw almost dropped. He had heard of places like this. It was a witch's lane or, well, a giant space underground lit by street lamps and such. It was filled with stores, and it wasn't all good. These places were hidden because there was black magic in these parts. Being here was illegal. He hurried to the sidewalk and he looked around as he walks, catching sight of the figure from before, and he stared, following once again. In the book, Ochako went to the dark magic realm on accident when she was taken in by some poachers who wanted to sell her into the SLV trade. She was saved by a warlock named Shinso, a failed love interest no less. It looked like they could have had something, but then the purple-haired mystery man met a blonde stable boy. It was adorable, though the relationship was doomed to fail. Ugh, Ochako. He bumped into a hard back, and he fell over on his butt. He looked up, and his eyes widened as the figure looked back at the green-haired boy. "So you have been following me," the gruff voice says as the figure squats down and looks at the male. Izuku flinched as the hand reached next to his ear and pulled out a small piece of candy. "Don't worry, I won't do anything, don't worry," he says as he looks at the boy. "My baby brother likes these," he says, handing the boy the chocolate. He looks at the redhead boy with ice blue eyes. "What's your name, little boy?" he asks as he looks at him. "I'm not supposed to give my name to strangers," Izuku says as he plays with his sleeves and he looks at the chocolate. He unwrapped it and took a small bite, smiling at the chocolatey milky taste. "Ah well, that's smart, I'm Toya," he smiled, and Izuku swallowed. "The eldest prince, the one who was locked up for years until his escape, the one who joined the demons and sold his soul. My name is Izuku Midoriya, son of Lord Hisashi Midoriya," he says, bowing his head in respect. "Now, what is a child doing here?" he asks. "I could ask you the same thing," Izuku snapped back. "Interesting toddler," Toya says back with a small smile as he stands up. "Let's get you back to the streets, little Omega," Toya says as she looks at the boy. "There are a lot of people that could do you harm here. Don't travel here alone," he says as he helps the boy up. Izuku only nodded because what else could he do? This was the prince and a teenager, so he was not going to say no. He was lead out of place, and when he was back to society, the prince left as soon as he appeared. "There you are, Lord Izuku. You can't run off like that," Hana says as she takes the boy by the shoulders and looks at him with a cross expression. "I'm sorry, Miss Hana," he says as he looks at her. Izuku nodded as he wiped his eyes, and he began to cry. He couldn't help it. He didn't like being yelled at. He never had. "Oh, it's okay, Izuku, just never do it again. You have to understand how valuable you are," she says as she hugged him. "Now come on, Katsuki is worried sick," she says as she leads him to the store, and Katsuki glared down at Izuku. He started yelling. Izuku drowned it out, though, so he didn't listen. Only murmuring small, "I'm sorry," and so on. "Anyway," Katsuki says as he holds out an egg, and Izuku looks at it curiously. "This is a magic egg. You want a friend, right? When I'm off at school, you're going to get lonely, plus a lot of Omegas have these. You can merge them with whatever pet you have, and it will give them more magical abilities. You can get a cute cat or maybe a bird," he says. "I have Cerberus," Izuku says happily, and Katsuki shakes his head. "MOT with that devil dog," Katsuki says. Cerberus did not like Katsuki. Izuku smiled and didn't listen as he held the egg, and he smiled happily. "Thank you, Kaken," he says. When Izuku got home, he looked at his small white dog and held the egg. He smiled as he sat down and held out the egg in front of him. His puppy went up to it and sniffed a bit before eating the egg. Izuku didn't think that was how it worked, but oh well. A bright light appeared, and a whoosh of air made Izuku cover his face. When he peeked his eyes through his hands, he gasps because his small dog was not small anymore. There was a big doggo sitting in front of him. Izuku was small, so his standing was about how tall the dog was sitting down. "Wow!" Izuku says with a happy smile as he hugged his dog, and he giggled. He knew two things from that day. The first being Katsuki better stay away from his dog, and the second being that it was not the last time he would be going to the witch's lane. Seeing Toya that he could have a different fate as well. He didn't have to be killed. That was who he would become. Most 6-year-olds attend school. Whether it be homeschool or going to primary school, they are in the educational system. Izuku had always dressed the idea of such a thing. In his past life, his days were filled with torment. Students wrote on his desk and would trip him in the halls. What made it worse were the teachers did nothing to stop the harassment until it was too late. Though in this new world Izuku craved school, he wanted to learn more about this world and the secrets it had to offer. He already had a plan for when he turned 15, he wanted to go to UA Magic Academy for the Gifted. It was a school mostly inhabited by people from high-class families and some lucky few that are knights in training or maybe just lucky. This school was where Bakugo and Kirishima were attending. Sadly, the green-haired boy currently had no magic ability whatsoever, so he was going to train and get better until the next time he could attempt to get in. And that would leave 3 years until Ochako Uraraka was even going to make an appearance. Alas, for now he has to wait at home with his tutor. 15. That would be when he made his debut as the Omegan son of Lord Midoriya. There would be a party, and that's when he would bring up the choice of him wanting to attend the school of his choice. And when he finally hit in, he would just avoid the upperclassmen and be safe, and then after he can defend himself he can go be a farmer or something like that. He hummed as he leaned on the wooden table in his room as his teacher spouted on about spelling and history. Now my lord, his teacher Mrs. Ito. Many years ago there were 3 demigods, magic, power, and fate. The 3 sisters sat upon the great thrones of the heavens helping stray travelers find answers for their problems. One being our first king. He went to the goddesses and pleaded with them, asking them for help, which they responded by giving out king 3 gifts. The goddess of magic gifted an empty book and said the words you fill on this page will be blessed and read for years to come. The second youngest, the goddess of fate, gave a pendant and said this pendant shall bless you with intuition, you will know what path to choose. And the third sister, the eldest, the goddess of power, gave him a dagger and said, you must keep this from the hands of evil, with this dagger you shall give the land justice and peace. Yet with all 3 there was a cost, Mrs. Ito says. The youngest said, although with my book comes danger, your linkage will be looked for across the land, and must you never rest again with the kings he you bear, you may be seen as a fool, she said before the second youngest spoke. With this pendant must you never speak adventure and go off the path set for you. And with the eldest she said, just as easy as you may be a hero may you be a villain and plunge the world into darkened and war. You may be wondering why I am telling you this tale, my lord, she says, looking at the green-haired boy who had finally started to pay attention. I'm sorry, Mrs. Ito, too was not listening, my mind was far away, the 6-year-old said as he looked at the older woman who had her hair back in a bun. She smiled and patted his head because shaking her head and pushing up the glasses that hung low on her nose. It is quite all right, it's fine for your mind to wander at times, but I'm telling you this because it is important to know with every good in the word or every offer of assistance there is also bad, and you should be careful. Being a pretty charming Omega is not doing you any favors, she says as she sets the book down. Now go play, your lessons are done for today, your father is in a meeting to do, care to not disrupt him, she says, and Izuku nodded, standing up happily as he ran out of his. Cerberus, who had been curled up by the fire, looked up and watched his master leave the room. The dog was far from vicious. Being lazy was a much better time spent, so he laid his big head back down to go back to his slumber next to the warmth of the fire. Izuku smiled as he ran around the house. He had a while before tea time with his father, and if the man was in a meeting, he may as well go to the garden. He hummed happily as he held a small basket in his hands, and he made his way to his and his father's usual spot. It was under a large tree overlooking a hill. Izuku loved the spot. It was peaceful, and he had spent his summer days with Katsuki there. He walked on over to the spot but stopped, and his heart began to thump against his chest. There lay an ice prince, with red and white hair sleeping under the shade of the old tree. Izuku stood there for a few seconds before walking forward and sitting down. He fixed up his shirt and he reached out to grab the male's hand, though it was of times soon since the other male reached out and grabbed his wrist, stopping him from moving any further. The boy opened his eyes and Izuku was now faced with the beauty of the boy's eyes. "Are you an angel?" the boy asked, and Izuku could not speak a single word to this ice prince as he heard his father call his name. "Izuku!" he called, and he looked back to see the red and white-haired boy with Michmock's eyes was gone. "What have I told you about coming up here alone?" his father scolds, and Izuku grabbed his shirt, pulling on it slightly. Papa, I just saw an ice prince. He was right here and Izuku asks. "You have a big imagination, Izuku," his father says as he looks at him and he pats his head. "I'm not joking, he was here," Izuku says. Sure," his father teased, and Izuku pouts, knowing his father was teasing him as he whined. The male pinched his cheek and Izuku whined. "Daddy," Izuku whined. "I'm not making this up, he was really here and he was pretty. Like a glass doll. But he looked so sad. He didn't look like he had smiled in such a long time, Daddy. I wanted to make the ice prince smile," he says, looking down at his shoes, and his father picked him up, wagging him on his lap as he leaned against the tree. "Oh, my sweet boy, I'm sure you will meet this ice prince of yours one day again," his father says as he plays with the boy's green hair. "Now let's have lunch, okay?" "Okay, Papa, okay," Izuku says as he starts to eat his lunch. And little did he know he would meet the ice prince again, though he would dread it. Prince Todoroki Show 2. He had always felt bad for the male. His mother was locked up, his father was power-hungry, and his brother had been missing. The male was ice-cold to most. Let Lady Ochako into his heart when she attended a debut ball and they shared a dance. Izuku had wanted to know that the male smiled after the fact. Though he knew the Izuku in the book wanted to turn Todoroki against them. Maybe he could make the other like him eventually. He still wanted to see that glass doll smile. Izuku hummed quietly as he looked outside of the carriage window, his eyes shining a bit as he pressed his cheek against the glass. It had been 3 years since he had 9 years since he had woken up in a new body. The years had their high points and low points, but overall, it hadn't been too bad. He hadn't even thought of the possibility of his presence changing the story's outcome. And it was quite odd how Katsuki more or less did not detest him. The boy still came and went like he wanted to be there to see the boy. Kirishima had been taken in by the Bikuga family about a year ago. He knew this because the boy had stopped coming to the fence to accept food from Izuku. Another thing that was quilly terrible was how Katsuki was 2 years older than him, so because the boy was 11, that meant Izuku had to see him less and less. He didn't know why this should be terrible. But he missed the kid. A sigh came from the boy's lips as the carriage came to a stop. Izuku looked from the window and to his nanny, who was getting out of the carriage with the help of a footman. Even if normal kids would be out playing in the summer, he did not count what he was about to do as a fun summer activity. Izuku was not a fan of tea parties, but it had become a common occurrence as a young Omega from a high-class noble family. Not to mention the preparations for these ordeals were nothing to scoff at. His manners. Teacher Mrs. Hetherington was strict and not afraid to crack a whip if he did not follow suit. No one had yet to notice the red marks on his legs from when he would make a mistake. "This way, my lord," a young maid says as she walks forward. Izuku sighed as he followed, and he looked around the path. He would admit the garden was nice and lovely, the flowers were at their peaks. He was led to a gazebo that shaded a table where some young Omegas and young ladies were seated. Izuku sat down quietly in an empty seat, and he looked at his hands. "Ah, Lord Midoriya, I'm glad you could make it," Kendo says with a smile, a nice beta girl. She did have beautiful hair. She had always been kind to the green-haired Omega. Ever since they had met at the beginning of the year. Izuku smiled, and he gave a slight nod telling her it was nice to be there. He did get shy around large gatherings of people, so he decided it would be best to stay on the down low. Plus, how could he trust these people? The same ones who would turn their backs on him as soon as Lady Ochako came from the countryside. He glanced over to see some of the other faces. This included Momo, a high-class lady and future finance of Prince Todoroki. Again, Ochako changed that so that it never ended up happening. This led Momo to be seen as a possible villainess, though Izuku didn't see it. She was friendly, not mean-spirited like she appeared to be in the novel. Izuku held the glass to his lips, and he sipped at the herbal tea that he had been offered. "So, Midoriya," a girl named Arabella says as she looks at the boy. "You never speak of Lord Katsuki. Is he really as brave and strong as everyone says he is?" she asks with a dreamy look in her eye. It wasn't uncommon for people to pine for Katsuki, even with his nasty personality. He was handsome, well, he would grow up to be, but how could Izuku find an 11-year-old attractive? "I would say so," Izuku says as he placed the teacup down and he looks at her. "I have yet to see much of him in the past couple of months because of his training and schooling," he says politely as he sees some maids and servants bringing out tea and biscuits. There he saw a small boy, blonde hair tied back with a shoelace and marks on his wrists and arms. He looked hungry, to say the least. The boy set the food down, and as he was walking off, Arabella moved her foot and tripped the boy. The boy quickly got up and walked off with his head down. If I may, who was that boy?" Izuku asks. "Some new servant, a SLV, brought in from another country. My father got him from a traveling SLV trade market. I don't know why he bothered buying him though. As far as I know, all he's good for is a punching bag," she says. "But the Todoroki family requires a new stable boy, so he will be taken to the Capitol building soon," she says. That's when it clicked why the boys seemed familiar. An exotic boy, with locks like gold and eyes like the sun. The boy would watch the dark-haired magician from afar when he would do his work. They clashed like the sun and the moon, yet their love that was once forbidden should never be, as the second lost interest and craved only the eyes of the fair maiden Ochako. The boy, crushed by the loss of the one he found so dear, plunged himself into darkness and the last breath by his own hands. Kaminari had not even been a villain, just a side story that added background to another love interest. Shinso, Siro, who had been Kaminari's friend, and Mina, urged Katsuki to rethink his attraction to Uraraku, but they ultimately fell for her charms as well. "I would like to buy him," Izuku says. He knew just how much dying would SCK. He could possibly change this boy's fate as well. If he made the boy his personal attendant, then maybe he could save the boy. "Well, you would have to talk to my father and dash." She paused as Izuku set down a pretty pink jeweled hair clip that he personally never wanted to wear in his life. "This is from across the sea," he says. "Can I please have your servant, miss?" he asks. He walked out of that tea party with a servant. Izuku sat across from the servant boy, and he hummed, looking at him up and down. "So, Denki," he says with a bright smile, "my name is Izuku Midoriya. It's a pleasure to meet you formally," he says. The boy bowed his head, and he looked at him but never made direct eye contact. "So you will be working for me from now on as my right-hand man?" he says with a smile. "Yes, my lord," Kaminari says. "Please, you do not have to be so formal with me in a private place. I hope one day we can be friends," Izuku says with a small smile, and he keeps going. "Call me Izuku," he says, "and I will call you Kaminari," he says. "If I may speak, that I don't have the quality you are looking for me to have. I am the son of a framer. I tend to animals and shear sheep as well as milk cows and collect eggs. I don't know how to take care of the matters you would need me to do," he says. "Well, that's not an issue really," Izuku says with a smile, and he stands up, walking to the boy and kneeling down. This was something someone from high-class society would never dare do. "Let's be friends, okay?" he says. "I want you to see me as an equal. All I really want is some company," he smiled. "And you can give me that, right? So, please call me Izuku," he says. Denki finally looks him in the eyes, and Izuku's heart clenched. Why did this kid have to be so adorable? He wanted to just give this boy a cookie and all the sweets he could provide. "Then, Izuku," the boy says. "Please call me Denki." Izuku gulped as he looks ahead of him. Sweat dribbled down the side of his face, and he furrowed his eyebrows. "Katsuki, you okay?" he says as he ran past him. "Come of Deku, you can't be afraid of a little snake," the blonde says as he ran after the green-haired boy, and he held up a small garden snake. He laughs as Izuku looked left and then right before he saw a big oak tree. He started to climb it. As he got halfway up the tree, he looks down at Katsuki and the blonde boy locked eyes with him. "Deku, get down from there," Katsuki says as he looks up at the boy, and Izuku sticks out his tongue. No way. Kaken, I hate snakes, I dash. He paused as he lost his grip on the tree, and he felt his hold give way. Air rushed past him. When he felt his back hit the ground, his vision went blurry until the darkness clouded around him, and soon there was nothing. When the boy opened his eyes, he was in a field of flowers. He hummed as he looks around. Where dash? He paused as he rubbed his aching head. He heard muffled talking and he looked over at a tall oak tree. The boy padded through a field and he paused, seeing himself there with his knees tucked into his chest. He didn't look more than 15 at the time. Izuku saw a small stream and his breath hitched. He no longer looked like Izuku, but instead, he had the body of a scrawny boy with black hair and red eyes. That's when he remembered this was his old body, Kanji Tanya. But he was no longer that boy. He smiled and he knelt down. He was taller than Izuku since he was 19 at this point in his old body. Hey, why are you crying? He asks, tugging on the collar of his school uniform. I don't need to talk to some commoner like you, so leave me alone. I want Katsuki, Izuku murmurs, wiping his teary eyes. He would admit Book Izuku was kind of a brat. He laughed embarrassedly and he sighed. Look, Katsuki doesn't like you like that, and I know it, Esigus. I know it isn't nice to feel like you are alone in this world, but it's going to be okay. Just take a step back and make sure you aren't selfish, he says. Izuku looked up at him and he bit his cheek. So I'm selfish for wanting Kaken to love me. It isn't fair. No one ever loves me. They never give me a second glance. No one likes me no matter how hard I try, and that all I have ever wanted was to be noticed. To be cherished even a little. I'm a BSD child. I have no use and that I'm just a stupid nobody. He says, so how come Kaken likes you so much? Kanji smiled and he looks at him, taking his hands in his. You're amazing, he says as he looks at him, and after a couple of seconds, he started again. Look, just be yourself, don't try and change, he says with a smile as he stands up. Another gust of wind passed by him, and his features changed once again. I have to go back now, but I won't let us die like fate says we should, he smiled, and Izuku looks at him. Thank you, he says as everything melts away, and he opens his eyes. He saw Katsuki looking down at him. Kaken, are you crying? He asks as he looks at him, and Katsuki wiped his eyes. And no you are, he says, and Izuku let out a small laugh, and he smiled shyly. So, did I have a question, Kissichan, do you care for me? He asks. What kind of question is that? You hit your head. You gotta call a doctor, he says. Izuku smiled because now he knew Katsuki did care for him in one way or another. The rest of the summer was spent inside, he had broken his arm, and now he wasn't allowed near trees. It was silly, but his father was kind of an odd guy. Izuku sat back in a chair throwing a stick across the garden, watching Cerberus run after it. Hey Denki, Izuku says as he looks at the blonde boy who was sitting next to him. Denki hummed as he looks at the boy. Yeah, what is it? He asks, tilting his head to the side. Why are so many people on staff today? Is someone coming over? He asks, and Denki nodded. Well, yes, from what I have been told by Hana, some wizard prodigy is coming over today to take notes on some artifact your father had gotten his hands on. He says, he's coming with Prince Toya, he smiled. Izuku nodded, everything had been going fine. He smiled and he paused glancing over at the pathway, and he paused seeing a young boy walking through with Prince Toya. He looked to be 11 years of age, and his heart stopped. Izuku stood up and he stood in front of Denki. Don't look. What are you talking about? Oh Izuku, you shouldn't be standing, the blonde says as he sees Izuku's hat fall off his head, and he cursed quietly before he started running after the hat. Don't worry, I'll get it, he says. Denki no, Izuku says as the blonde tripped, and the boy that was walking caught him. It was romantic and almost in slow motion. But all Izuku felt was a shame because his plan had failed. Denki and Shinso were never supposed to meet. Denki and Shinso were looking at each other, gazing into the eyes of each other. I'm sorry, Denki squeaks as he looks at Shisnu who nodded. I'm Denki, he says. Shisnu. Demon it. Izuku yelled chapter text. Everything was not going to plan. If this was happening, it could set the rest of the story in motion, like dominoes lined up in a row ready to be knocked over and start a chain reaction that ends only with total destruction. Ever since Kaminari and Shinso had met, Denki had been giving puppy dog eyes to the mage. Izuku let out a small sigh as he held the teacup to his lips, and he looked over at Kaminari, who was glancing over across the garden at the purple-haired boy who was not so sneakily looking back at him. "Stop looking at him," Izuku says coldly. "It will only bring you grief, Kaminari. Look, trust me on this, what you think could possibly happen won't," he says as he looks at him, and Kaminari sighed before he grinned. "You worry too much. He's really nice, I promise. We have been talking and well, he's handsome and I want to climb him like a tree," he says with no shame, and Izuku almost spits out his tea. "Kaminari," Izuku says. "Please, it's only been 2 months since he's been here. And it's not like you can follow him all the way to the capital. You work here when he leaves. Are you planning on getting someone to write letters for you? It won't work out," he says. Why did this boy have to be so stubborn? "Izuku." Kaminari whined, and he smiled after a few moments. "Come on," he says. "It's just like those stories. Who know, maybe I'm like the main character," he says in a joking way. Izuku wanted to strangle the boy. He wanted to yell, "No! You fool! You are just a roadblock that will be destroyed in the long run. You won't survive like this. Can't you see I'm trying to help you?" Or that was what he wanted to say. That was 3 days ago. The green-haired boy sighed as he leaned his head against the bathtub wall. His damp hair sent water dribbling down the side of his cheek. He looks at him, and after a couple of moments, he sunk under the water, so only his eyes were above the water. Soon he got out of the bath, and he wrapped the towel around himself, walking to the counter and grabbing a soft silk nightdress, slipping it over his head, and straightening his gown. He peeked his head out and he hummed, "Kaminari? Kami.nari?" he asks, looking around for the mail. The boy was always there after his bath. Izuku walked out of his room, and he looks down the hall. "Kaminari," he called again, grabbing a candle and walking down the dark corridor. "Where is he? He better not be in the kitchen stealing bread again," he says, and he paused, hearing some murmuring. "I can't just leave," he hears. That was the blonde boy's voice. "You see, I signed a contract. I'm legally here until I'm 18, he says, and Izuku peeked out from behind a corner, seeing Kaminari talking to Shinso. "Besides, I owe everything to my master. I am nothing but a dog. I know that, and you should too. It is what they told me when they took me from my motherland, that I am nothing, that you shouldn't insist that I am anything more than a mutt," the blonde says. "Kaminari, you know more than anyone that I hate this DMN country. Come on, I can protect you," he says as he looks at him, and he cupped the boy's cheek. It hurt to hear, but at the same time, he had always liked the relationship the two had in the novel, and getting to witness their secret love made his heart thump. "Shinso," Kaminari says, and they shared a kiss. Izuku knew what he had to do. It wasn't fair for him to be the reason Kaminari and Shinso couldn't see each other. He had just thought if he kept the boy from Uraraka and Shinso, then he would never be hurt, but he supposed some things don't change. Izuku walked to his room, and he sat down scribbling on a parchment. He sighed, and he folded the paper and stuck it into the envelope. He placed his seal on the paper, and he wrote the address before ringing the bell. Kamianri came in a couple of moments later, and he looks at Izuku. "I'm sorry, I was just cleaning," he says. "Sit down," Izuku says, and Kaminari sat down in a seat in front of the boy's desk. "Here," he says, sliding the leader across the table. Denki looked at it with confusion in his eyes. "I can't read, my lord," he says. "What do you want me to do with this?" "I don't understand," he says, and Izuku spoke again on the matter at hand. "It is a letter of recommendation. You will be picked up tomorrow afternoon, and you will be serving in the staff of the Bakugo household. I do not decide your position there. Kaken won't mistreat you, and you have already made friends with Sir Kirishima and Siro, and Lady Mina visits often, that you won't be lonely," he says. "But why are you doing this? Have I done something wrong?" he asks, holding the letter. Izuku wanted to tell him it was because Shinso lived close by, and contact would be ensured. But he knew the other wouldn't want to go for that reason. He knew he had to be harsh and unforgiving, just like a villain of a novel should be. He swallowed thickly, and he stands up, looking down at his desk. "The reason, well, it is quite simple. What use do I have for a Omega in waiting who isn't even from this country? Your accent is awful, and to listen to it all day makes me want to gouge my eyes out. You're just a replaceable toy that I am now bored of. You should be thanking me, really, that I could have just killed you or sold you off to some older man who just wants a pretty face to play with while his mate is away. That I overheard you speaking to that man. To think, you are so desperate. It really is a downer. He would never be attracted to a beggar, he says. Kaminari only nodded, and that made the whole thing worse. I know, my lord, I will take the recommendation with grace. Thank you for these months I have spent in a nice environment. I will take my leave, he says, bowing his head, his lips pressed into a thin line. Thank you, my master, I was honored to serve you. I will pack my things, the blonde says before bowing and turning away before leaving. As Izuku watched the boy walk off, he flopped down in his chair and held his face in his hands. He was not happy like his character in the book would have been. He didn't mean anything that he had said, but he needed the boy to be happy. Kaminari was his first friend that he could count wouldn't try and kill him. He was entirely at ease with the blonde, but he would be more content working at the Bakugo Manor. He hoped that one day he could apologize to the boy. He wished they could be friends one day in the future. Many months had passed, and it was winter once again. Izuku had received a letter from Katsuki about Kamianri's well-being at the manor. Dear Deku, you asked me how Dunce's face was. He has been getting along with everyone just fine. He gets into trouble all the time along with shitty hair and tape boy. Even Raccoon Eyes has taken a liking to him. I can't believe you let the kid go. I don't know what happened, but he won't look anyone above knight status in the eye. It took pretty long for me to get him to trust me. He's good with animals and he knows how to get things done, so I have made him my squire. I know he's an Omega, but he is good at what he does. What I'm trying to tell you that everything is fine. Don't worry so much. He isn't 9 like you, he's 12, and that means he can handle himself, so don't sweat it. Love, Katsuki. Izuku was just relieved that the boy was okay, but why did Katsuki write love in the ending? Any other person would have just written something like best wishes. It's not like their relationship would go anywhere. It couldn't. That's not how everything was supposed to play out. Izuku bit his nail as he looked out his window. It was a bad habit that he had not yet corrected, though he knew that he needed to. He sighed as he looked away from the window and to the mirror. In his old life, being 15 meant you would be going to high school. He guessed it wasn't too different from what he would be doing soon. He would be debuting that night. He didn't think he was ready for such a formal event. He had shaped out recently. He was no longer a skinny pole, but now he had some curve on him as well. He had finished growing, and that year he would be going to school. The only reason he was going to magic school because he had managed to use a small amount of earth magic. He wasn't the strongest, but he could use it, and because he was noble, it qualified him to go. He was dressed in a white lace flowy dress with a light green ribbon tied around his slim waist. He looked at his bare neck, and he sighed, knowing it would soon be adorned with a new collar. You see, around this time, the Omega would start heats or be able to be marked, so the coming of age part meant you get a shiny new collar. It had been a difficult couple of years. He just didn't understand how events could happen with his interference. You must not bite your nails like that. It's rude. He hears. He looked over to the door to see his manners tutor, and he sighed. He hated this woman with a burning passion. He had gotten slaps on the wrists with rulers so many times he couldn't count. He had scars on his palms from a couple of times where it had gone too far. He was handed a pair of gloves, and he slipped them on without a word. Yes, I know, but can I have an exception this one time? He asks as he looks at her, and she just sighed, crossing her arms across the chest looking at the green-haired boy with a cross look on her face. I suppose I will let it slip just this once. What can I expect from a half-blood anyway? She says, and he looked down at his shoes. He had learned to ignore these kinds of remarks. What good was it to listen to them when he heard them so often? The carriage is waiting for you, you must not be late, or you will be seen as someone who is never on time, she says, and he walked past her. In times like these, he missed Kaminari. The blonde boy had been a cornerstone for him in a way while he had been working there. He didn't want to look the boy in the eye. And he was planning on staying to his word because that night, the debutante ball was being hosted at the Bakugo Manor. As he sat in the decorated carriage, he leaned back against the plush emerald green seats, and he closed his eyes. He did not open them when the carriage started to move. The days had passed lonely and slow. Because Katsuki was at school, he had been all alone. The maids didn't avoid him, but they weren't his friends. When he arrived at the manor night had taken over the sky, he stepped out and walked inside. He scurried down the stairs avoiding talking to anyone, and he found himself seated in the corner of the room. The party was full of young Omegas dressed in a similar fashion as he was. Alphas also filled the room as it was a party for coming out into society and presenting yourself. "Now, what are you doing all the way over here sitting down?" he heard, and he looked up, seeing a tall man with red hair. He looked at the man with a confused look in his eye, but his heart skipped a beat when the male smiled. "Kirishima? What happened to you? You have gotten so big," he says, standing up and placing his hands on the male's forearms for support. The redhead let out a small laugh as he grinned, looking down at the boy. "Well, I grew up, it's great to see you, but Kogu really didn't do you any justice when he told me how you look now," he says, scratching the back of his head. "We should that we can dance now or later if you want," he says, and Izuku smiled. "That would be great, Kirishima," he says as he looks at him. "But I promised Kaken the first dance, but save me a place on your dance card. I am positively sure there are many people just waiting to dance with you," he says as he looks at him, and the redhead nodded. "Shitty hair, who the hell are you talking to, Deku?" Katsuki says as he looks at the green-haired male, and the boy smiled back. "Wow, you dressed up," he says as if the boy wasn't supposed to. "You will be going to UA Academy this year, right?" "Geez," he says, and Izuku smiled, laughing slightly. "Come on, Kaken, and you are acting as if we have only met a couple of times. We are friends, aren't we? You don't have to be so well-mannered around me. We are friends, after all," he says, and Katsuki rolled his eyes, reaching over and taking his gloved hand. "Well then come and dance with me, motherfucker," he says with a smirk as he dragged Izuku to the dance floor, and the green-haired male let a small chuckle escape his lips as he felt the male's hand on his waist and the other still intertwined with his. "You do know I am a terrible dancer?" Izuku says as they swayed to the music, and Izuku attempted to avoid stepping on the blonde boy's feet. "The worst in the country," Katsuki joked, and Izuku gave a fake offended huff, and he chuckled a little. "Word gets around. Your dance teacher quit 3 days into your lessons, didn't he now? He said his mother was sick, you bully." He smiled as he was twirled into the male's arms and then back out. "See, I haven't stepped on your feet yet?" he says before he felt his heel dig into the boy's shoe. "Well, that was longer than last time." "See, what did I tell you?" he says as he leaned in slightly. Hence, their faces were inches apart. "You are still a little kid, Deku," he says as he looks at him. "And I am still more mature," he says. "Don't go growing up so fast, remember? You're 15 now, sure, but this year will be your first in the real world. You are still as innocent as a rose and as pure as a dove," he says. "Meanwhile, those swans you see out on the street are nothing but crows compared to you," he says. "You speak so poetically for someone talking to a child," he teased as the song ended. "Now look at that, you have left poor Kirishima all alone to fend off that horde of women," he says, motioning to Kirishima, who was awkwardly sipping a glass of lemonade. "Well, another dance later then. The downside of hosting this event is that I have to keep busy with the gusts," he sighed as he looks at him. "You behave, don't get into any trouble," he says, and Izuku nodded. He watched as the boy walked off, and he was about to turn and leave to walk to a chair when he saw a familiar face. Cloaked and darker it was, but those ice-blue eyes still haunted him from that day in The Witch's Ally. He made his way to the balcony, but instead of seeing a cloaked man, he saw the prince. "It's a lovely night, isn't it?" Izuku says, walking next to him, and he smiled. The boy nodded slowly, and Izuku spoke again. "I heard about what happened with your brother, a terrible accident indeed that I hope for his recovery," Izuku says. "It was no accident," the prince says. "My father may have high society fooled, but it could have been nothing but far from the truth. Toya has not been seen by my siblings or me in 2 months," he says. It was true. They said the prince had been caught up in a burning carriage, but the truth was it was the king who had burned his son so savagely that he would be disfigured for life. Poor charming Toya. Or Dabi as he would be called when he joined the demons to take down the kingdom. "Your father is a cruel man," Izuku says with a sigh as he leaned against the terrace. "You are not to blame, my prince," he says, and he smiled. "My name is Izuku Midoriya, son of Lord Midoriya," he says, bowing slightly, and he smiled, "And you are Prince Todoroki Shoto. This is our first proper introduction, is it not?" he says. "You speak so freely for an Omega," he says. "And you for a prince," he says. "I am going to take over my father's succession. He has no more children, so I must be able to stand my own against the injustice we as Omegas face against Alphas. If we look forward, we can see greatness, but look behind will lead to nothing," he says. "You are interesting," he says, and Izuku smiled before feeling someone bump into him from behind, spilling a drink onto him. "Oh, I apologize," a woman says with poison in her voice. Izuku only smiled and he sighed. "I will go find a maid and change. Thank you for your time, my prince," Izuku says before walking off. He looked for Katsuki but couldn't find him, so he walked down the hall away from the party, and he knocked on the servants' quarters. "Excuse me, can someone help me out?" When the door opened, he stopped. In front of him, blonde hair and bright yellow eyes. "Oh, Lord Midoriya," he says. "Kaminari I-. Let us talk someplace privately and I can get your clothes cleaned up," he sighed, taking Izuku's hand and walking to his room. The room was small with a plain bed, a small drawer with some books, a desk, and a window. "Kaminari, I must talk to you about all those years ago," Izuku says. "What is there to speak about? I was no use to you," he says. "You must cut off loose ties, as they say," he says, and Izuku shakes his head. "The truth is that I am from another world, or well, I was reincarnated into this body. I wanted to protect you," he says as he looks at the blonde-haired boy who had no expression on his face before he burst out laughing, and Izuku, who was a bit taken aback, took a step back and looked at the male in surprise. He must have sounded insane. "Oh, my lord, I know that already," he says with a smile. What? "The truth is that I am from another world, or well, I was reincarnated into this body. I wanted to protect you," he says as he looks at the blonde-haired boy who had no expression on his face before he burst out laughing, and Izuku, who was a bit taken aback, took a step back and looked at the male in surprise. He must have sounded insane. "Oh, my lord, I know that already," he says with a smile. What? "Kaminari, what do you mean you already knew that?" he asks as he looks at him, and he blinks a couple of times in disbelief. "How? When, huh?" he asks. His head was spinning. How did the boy know? It didn't make any kind of logical sense. "Well, where I am from, there are tales of people coming from other worlds to change things here. As you know, I am not from this country," he says as he sits on his bed, and he looks at him with a grin. "So I had my suspicions. You don't act like most people who have been raised in the position you have been," he says. "But still, that doesn't explain how you found out," he says as he looks at him. How was the boy speaking so casually to him? If he had found out someone was from another world, he would have thought the person was crazy or freak out and ask a million questions. "Well, one day while I was cleaning your room I saw a notebook. It was open, and it had some weird language written inside of it. Then when I met Shinso, you seemed against it. And so I started thinking, why were you so impulsive? Why were there so many things that didn't make sense? Well, I brought it up to Shinso," he says as he looks at him, and Izuku sighed. "We concluded that you are either a time traveler or you were from another place entirely. When he suggested I leave in case you try and do something that would change fate, I told him I couldn't do it. But you fired me," he says as he looks at him, and he moved his hands, so they were holding the other boys. He smiled slightly. "You are smarter than you let on, aren't you?" he asks with a small smile, and Denki nodded. "It is easier to be dumb and be treated as someone who knows no better than what they are told than to be smart and have eyes on me at all times," he says as he lets go of Izuku's hands and he stands up, walking over to his counter, and he started looking through some drawers. "Shinso says he had a dream that something bad is coming and preparing for the worst," he says, and he pulled out a bottle, smiling as he pulled out some tablets, and he looks at Izuku. "Tell me about your other world, my friend," he says. "My world?" he says as he looks at him. "Well, where I lived, it was called Japan. There is no magic, but we had more advanced technology," he says as he looks at him. "The food was nice. Still, I never really had the best life there," he admits as he looks at him. "I was always hungry. I had no one to care for me," he admits. "But enough about me. I realized I really don't know much about you. What was your old home like?" he asks as he looks at the male. It was a bunch of islands under one colony across the West Sea, he says. Life there was amazing from what I remember, he says as he looks at him. When I was young, I spent my summers on the beach. I would play with my friends and catch shellfish. In the winters, it wasn't cold like it is here. Though we would play when it did snow, then, at 7 I was taken away, me and others from my homeland, we were taken here, we didn't understand the language and we were sold, he says. Still I do not hate my life here after you helped me all those years ago. I made friends and found someone who loves me as much as I love them, he says as he smiled. I just don't want that to be taken away from me, he explained. I know, I don't want that to happen either, he says as he looks at him and he pulled at the gloves on his hands. I should probably return to the party soon, he says as he looks at him. Do you have anything to help with this stain? He asks, and the blond boy nodded as he grabbed a cloth, and he used one of the tablets he had pulled out, dissolving it in some water, and he dampens the fabric. He then pressed the material against the stain, and when he pulled away, it was gone. Oh! It is something I learned from Shinso. He says, you are going to UA Academy this year, right? You learned magic, he asks. That is going to be an amazing opportunity, he says. I'm sure Katsuki will be happy to have you around, he says as he looks at him, and he elbowed his arm playfully, making Izuku blush. Pleased to me, Katsuki as well, you know he doesn't like me like that, and I don't like him like that, he says. The blush on your face says otherwise, he says, and Izuku furrows his brows. He didn't like Katsuki, no he couldn't. Why would he? The boy was careless and frankly an a-hole, so how could he like him? I'm just joking with you, he says as he smiled, but hurry on back to the party, he says, people might get suspicious of your disappearance, he says. Yeah, okay, I will, he says as he smiled, please come see me again, he says. I missed you, he says. Denki nodded his head, and he hugged the green-haired boy. Yeah, don't worry, I won't leave you hanging, my lord, he says, and Izuku nodded as Denki pulled away and he turned around, walking back to the party. He had someone he could talk to, but something about the whole situation just didn't sit right with him. How did Shinso know? Who was that guy really? He doesn't think he ever even said a word to the purple-haired mage. As the boy mumbled to himself, he walked back to the ballroom, and he glanced around the room, looking for one of his friends. He saw Kirishima once again, and he walked up to him. He smiled. Where did Kaken go? He asks as he looks at the redhead who smiled. He's talking to a nice lady. She is staying with her uncle, he added, and he motioned over to Katsuki. Izuku glanced at the girl he was talking to, and he stopped. This wasn't right. It was too early. The girl's brown hair was combed down neatly, and her big brown eyes sparkled as she talked. Who is she? He asks. The girl that he is talking to. Her? Oh, I think she said her name was Uraraka, he says. Why? He asks, looking at Izuku, who looked as if he had seen a ghost. Are you okay? You look pale, he says. I think I am going to be sick, he says as he rushed past Kirishima and out the door. His head was spinning like a carousel. He walked out to the garden, and he fell to his knees, his hands in the grass as he threw up the small amount of food that had been his dinner. When he was done, he wiped his mouth, his eyes stung. I am not going to die, I am not going to die, he says as he curled up. I won't die, not now, not after I have lived so long like this, he says, wiping his eyes. No matter what hunts me down and tries to kill me, it won't happen. I made a promise, he says as he stands up, and he feels a soft wind blow past him. This was just the start. So far, he had been on easy mode, but now, the real challenges were just beginning. He was not a villain, but if he had to do some shady things to keep himself alive, so be it. Izuku looks at the building in front of him. The bright sun shines down on him as it was just the end of summer. The building was old, but it never lost its charming magical touch. The building had many staircases that Izuku couldn't even count. The white stained stone added elegance with the stained windows contrasting the stone. He took a deep breath as he grabbed his 2 travel bags. He had refused to take more than what he could carry with him. He walked up the stairs gazing around at the other new students of his year. Some talked to others as they walked, and some were followed by servants carrying bags upon bags behind them. Ever since that night he had seen Uraraka at the debutante ball, he had avoided going out into the public as if it were the biggest monster ever to terrorize the world. The green-haired boy just couldn't handle seeing the woman he knew would be the reason he would die. If he avoided her, maybe they wouldn't have to interact and nothing would happen between them. That worked in his opinion. It was a big school, the chance that they would even bump into each other was small. He walked inside and his eyes brightened. Creatures roamed around the inner gates. It was as if he had stepped into the most extraordinary place he could even imagine. "You must hurry, young lord. The headmaster is speaking to all of the new students in 5 minutes. If you're late you will get a bad reputation. Go on. Go on." He hears and he looks behind him where the voice was coming from. He saw a fairy speaking to him. She was older, so she must have been part of the staff. He nodded, unsure of what to say, as he ran off to the chapel where he saw many of the other students wandering into. A statue of Nana stood inside. He looked at the building. The cracking stone looked as if it would fall apart at the slightest touch. He looks at it for a few seconds before he walked past, and he sat down in one of the very, very long lines of chairs that stretched down the aisle. "How are there so many people here?" he says with a sigh as he bit his cheek, and he looks ahead of him as chatter filled the room, and soon enough the headmaster of the school. His face went blank as the mouse thing. Rodent? He honestly didn't know what this creature was. But anyway, it stepped onto a stool and clears its throat. "Greetings, students. Welcome to your first year of the UA Academy of Magic. I am the headmaster. You may refer to me Nizu. Next to me is our class president Lord Ida and Lady Momo," he says as 2 students step up. The first was a tall man dressed in a knight's uniform. It wasn't uncommon for a noble to be a knight. He has glasses and dark hair. He looked smart and Izuku's liked smart. And next to him was Lady Momo. She was known throughout the land as the Rose of the House of Momo. She was engaged to the prince no less. Though there was no point since, well, she was a lesbian, and the second issue was Todoroki fell for Uraraka. Demon, that girl. But Momo would ultimately end up leaving Todoroki for her secret relationship with another knight named Jiro. He had always liked Jiro's character. So he was more than happy to let that relationship play out. "Hello everyone. As the heads of the student council, it is our responsibility to take care of every single one of you. If you have any questions, please come to us. You see, our school is full of magic. Things may be different from day-to-day life," Momo says with a warm smile. "There is wonder as well as danger at every corner, so please take care. We have many activities, so you may also speak to any of the older students." She says, "Please have a great year, everyone." She smiled and Izuku smiled slightly. He didn't see Uraraka anywhere. Maybe by some turn of events, she didn't get into the school. He laughed to himself quietly, and some people looked at him, but he didn't mind at the moment. As the introduction suspended, Izuku patted the dust off of his pants and he walks to the dorm rooms. He hummed contentedly as he stood on the hall. The numbers went odd, so just when to guess that he was on the right wing. He opened the door and paused as he looks ahead of him blankly, seeing a beefy half-naked Katsuki in front of him. His face reddened as he stands there blubbering a bit. "Kaken, why are you in my dorm? Shirtless?" he asks, and Katsuki turns around and he looks at him. "What do you mean your room?" "This is my room, you idiot. Don't keep looking. What the hell, you dirty-minded butt," Katsuki says, throwing his shirt at the boy's face, and Izuku made a sort of gurgling sound that made no sense. "Just turn around," the blonde alpha says, and Izuku turned around. After a few moments, Katsuki grabbed the boy's shoulder and sat him on his bed. "Okay, you can take my shirt off from your face," he sighed, and Izuku let the cloth fall onto his lap. "Kaken, I don't see what the big deal is. We used to take baths together," he says as he looks at the blonde. "Plus, we are both men. I've seen every part you have and so forth," he says, crossing his arms, and Katsuki hit him in the back of the head. "I call abuse, Kaken. Just don't talk like that. You're not a kid anymore. If anyone heard you were in my room and one of us was half naked, then that would ruin any chance of Omegas flocking after me or you being married to some respectable alpha," he says, blushing. "Wow, would it really be that terrible for us to be that close, Kaken?" he asks, crossing his arms, and the other huffed. How childish. Katsuki really did need to grow up. Kaminari was wrong. Ochako could have Katsuki. He didn't even want a mate. Being independent was what Izuku craved, and he would kick and scream before he ever got married off to some alpha. Just get out, Katsuki says, shoving the boy out of the room, and Izuku sighed, grabbing his bag and wandering back down the hall. He sighed as he turns the corner and he looks ahead blankly. He saw two people, one pinned against the wall. The smaller were being supported by the other holding them up. They were making out and Izuku sighed. The taller turned around and Izuku was more than a little surprised to see Shisnu looking at him blankly. That cheating scum. Just wait till he told. Oh hey Izuku, Kaminari says, looking past Shisnu. Now he was more confused for two reasons. Why was Kaminari there and why were they making out in public? Shisnu glared slightly as he looks at the green-haired boy. Izuku glared back because, well, okay, if Ochako could steal men from under people's noses, then so could he. Thought he was just stealing his best friend back. I don't like you, Shisnu says with a smirk. Yeah, I don't like you either, friend stealer. He sighed. Denki, how and why are you here? He asks, and Denki smiled brightly. Well, I couldn't bear to be alone all year alone. Kirishima, Katsuki, Shisnu, and even Mina all go here, and I knew I couldn't get in as a student, so I was smart and used my big brain to get a job in the meantime. Sure, cleaning up after people essays though. I get to be with this piece of CC man. He says, pointing to Shisnu. Izuku nodded. Well, I don't want to interrupt, so if you could point me to my room? Tis down the hall and to the left, Denki says, and he nodded, walking off. Before he could get to his room and finally settle down, he sighed. He tried to open the door, it wasn't budging. You need to kind of yank it open, he hears, like this. A girl says. Izuku hummed as he saw the girl open the door for him, and he smiled brightly. Oh, thank you, it's nice someone is helpful dash. He paused and he cursed the name of God right there, because why? Why did he have to have his room right next to Uraraka's? Helpful? She asks, and Izuku just nodded. You know, I saw you at that party the other night. You were just so lovely. I wanted to talk to you but you ran off. I hope you are feeling better from the sickness you came down with. She says, looking at him. And up close you are even more beautiful, like a doll, she says, a small blush on her cheeks, and Izuku blinks a couple of times. Thank you, he says as he looks at her, and she smiled. I'm sorry, I just must sound foolish coming off like this, but well, I don't have many friends, she admits as she looks to him, and he nodded. And I heard a lot about you from Lord Katsuki last night. You marvel me, you know that, she says, and Izuku just nodded along. He didn't know what you do, he didn't want anything to do with this woman. And yet she said she was friendless and so on, and he didn't know what to do because he really just wanted to go into his room and take a long nap. Oh, he says, still kind of not able to think of anything other than one word to say at a time. She nodded and looks at her. So we can be friends, she says, and she hugged him. Izuku blinks a couple of girls as she nuzzled into his neck. You smell amazing, can I call you Deku too? Like Lord Katsuki? Sure. Brilliant, she says, and she pulled away. You really are wonderful. Ha! He says as she gazed at him like she had true love in his eyes. Izuku slowly backed away and he chuckled. Right, well, see you? You're lovely too. So pretty, your eyes remind me of puppies. He says, slamming his door, and he sank against the door and he sighed. Why? Why me? He sighed, leaving the girl there blushing. He sighed and he stands up, walking to his desk and taking out a notebook, taking out a quill, and he started to write. Ochako wasn't supposed to like him, and it wasn't normal for an Omega to think of another Omega like that. It was looked down upon for an Omega to be attracted romantically to another one, and there was no way she thought of him like that, so it made no sense. He saw a box on his desk and he looks at it, reaching for the box and opening it. He looks at the note attached to it and he smiled slightly. Dear Izuku, make sure to study hard and represent the family. I appreciate how you have grown and you will do good at school. If you ever wish to return home, please enjoy yourself. Your father. Izuku sighed. I love you too, Dad. He smiled as he opens the box and he held a wand in his hand. It was a wooden wand carved with flowers and decorated with an emerald in the middle. He smiled and he held it to his heart. It was his mother's. He could tell. He smiled and he sighed. It was going to be okay. He opens the door again and he sees Ochako standing there. Why don't I help you unpack? He says, and she smiled happily. Sure. She smiled. Chapter text. Things were odd, and ever since Izuku had gotten to UA, he felt as if he were being watched. He sighed as he sat in the common room, holding a cup of tea. He plopped a sugar cube in the warm drink, and he watched it sink to the bottom of the cup. "You seem distracted," Ochako says as she placed a tea cake on his plate, and he smiled a bit wary of her. "Oh, it's nothing. I have just had some trouble sleeping is all," he says as he looks at the brown-haired girl. She had been following him around like a puppy since she had talked to her the first day. Well, people do say keep your enemies close, but in his opinion, this was a little too close. But the truth was there was a reason he wasn't getting any sleep at night. The night he had arrived after he had finally shaken off Uraraka, he had gotten a letter slid under his door. It said the following: "You are just like me. I know your secret," and it was labeled Y. Izuku assumed that it was Shinso. Kaminari had said they had been talking, so he had to guess that the purple-haired male just didn't know that Denki had spilled the beans. He sighed as he placed his head against the table, a bell ringing throughout the school, and he stood up, grabbing the books he had been talking with him, and he walked out of the common room, Ochako following behind. "So, Ochako, what do you think of Katsuki?" he asks, and she hummed, shrugging. Izuku had made the choice to set them up and stay out of it. That would then give him a reason not to get killed if he supported it. "Well, from what I heard, he's a real JRK, nothing like you, Izuku," she says, smiling fondly, and Izuku felt a chill run down his spine. Ochako was not like this in the book, and the male leads should have already met her. Not to mention this was happening 3 years before it should be. "Right?" he says as he sits down at his desk, and he looks ahead of him. There were some others in the class as well. As the seats filled up, he sighed, waiting for the teacher, but as the time ticked, it just seemed like the teacher forgot that they were supposed to be in class. But then a teared-looking man walked in, and he sat down in the chair that was placed behind the main desk. He had long black hair that looked rather messy, and he had a scarf around his neck even though it was not winter. "Is everyone here?" he asks. "Good, my name is Aizawa Shota. I am going to be your homeroom teacher. We teach a variety of classes here, like elemental, potions, charms, and so on. We do not teach dark arts. If we find out someone is using the dark arts, you will be sent away to trial. As you know, it's been illegal for hundreds of years," the man says, and Izuku looked down at his notebook. "After the first semester, you will have exams. If you pass, you will be on a path to be clarified, and if you fail, you would be sent home. Your other teachers will help you pass and make sure you are ready," he says as she looks at the group. "Mr. Midoriya, is there something you would like to share? You seem rather occupied with that notebook of yours," he says as he looks at the boy, and Izuku's eyes shot up as he looked at Aizawa. No, sir, I am just taking notes," he says before looking down at his hands. Aizawa hummed when he saw the boy look away from his eyes, and he turned to face the chalkboard, and he started drawing mutable magic circles. "If you like taking notes so much, copy all of these down and memorize them," he says as he looked at the boy, and Izuku nodded a bit. This teacher was interested in his mind, though he wanted to make him proud. That afternoon the boy sat in the library flipping the pages of his book, scanning over the pages though the note he had been sent sat as a page holder because he kept glancing over it. He sighed as he sat down in the library. It was about 9 p.m., and he was studying his magic circles like Aizawa had told him to. He flipped the page in his textbook, and he paused, seeing the same knot that had been slipped under his door. He had used it as a bookmarker so he would know his place and be able to keep the strange letter close just in case he came in contact with Shinso so he could question the boy's interest. He glanced up as someone sitting across from him at the table he had been sitting in, though that was kind of strange considering the building was empty, and there were many more chairs. "You looked lonely. Your name is Izuku, right? Or well, Lord Midoriya," he says. Izuku nodded, and the male spoke again. "Great, the name is Siro. I'm Bakuga's friend," he says. "One of them," he clarified. "It's a pleasure to meet you," he says, and he smiled a bit, looking at the tall black-haired male. Siro nodded, and he hummed, glancing at the textbook, and he grinned. "Mr. Aizawa, is your homeroom teacher this year, huh? Man, he can be a real buzz," he says, and he hummed. "So tell me more about you. What's your favorite thing to do?" he says. "I like to read," Izuku says as he smiled. Kaken didn't mention you, though I do recall your name being brought up time to time, he says, and Siro nodded. So why are you here at this time of night? The same as you. Well, I'm trying to figure something out, he admits, and I thought it was time to introduce myself. Mina was going to be here soon, but she might have forgotten. You will see her around, just look for pink hair, he says as he stands up and he turns to leave. Oh, and some dude told me to give you this. They had this weird cloak on, and I don't even know if they go here, but it's addressed to you, he says, and he placed a letter on the table before waving and walking off. Izuku opened the letter, and it was another message from S. Dear Izuku, does the word Japan mean anything to you? Izuku looked at the note, and he passed. Who are you? He says as he looks at the letter. There was someone there who at least knew about where he was from. But why were they keeping hidden? Ahead of him, and he paused, walking down the far halls of Yue. It was late, but the boy couldn't sleep. The fresh air had always helped settle his nerves. He saw some light illuminating the hallway, and he walked to it, peeking his head into a door to see the training grounds for knights in training. His eyes scanned the area, and he saw a figure in armor fighting a magic dummy. Magic dummies could be used as training opponents, so it made sense. What didn't add up was why someone was training at this time at night, especially since people tended to train in the afternoon or morning. The figure flashed across the arena and, with one quick slash, cut the dummy in half. Izuku blinked a bit as the person turned to face him, and Izuku glued. The figure walked to him and took off their helmet. Fdash, Izuku murmurs as he looks at them. Mina Ishido, Duchess of the House of Mina. She was pretty with curly pink hair and dark skin. Her eyes were as yellow as the sun. And Izuku was scared shitless of her. Their two characters didn't interact in the novel, but she was great at planning. She wasn't the smartest tool in the shed, but the girl had a sword that was unbelievable. She could make her weapon use said. She was one of Katsuki's generals, that of which he had forgotten about. Kirishima was the head, then Mina and Siro. He wasn't safe here. Apparently, these people had been suspicious of Izuku's true intentions from the start when they first met Katsuki. If Mina got the wrong idea, it could ruin everything. Hello, Izuku says as he looks at the girl who blinked a couple of times before smiling. Hey, Midoriya, right? The green one, she says as she looks at the boy, and she hummed contently. You shouldn't be out at this time, she says as she slammed her sword in the ground with enough force that it stuck in the ground. Izuku flinched slightly when she did this, and he sighed. You aren't supposed to either, Lady Mina, he says, and she chuckled. He looked at her, and he shifted in his place as he waited for whatever would come. Maybe she would kill him for speaking to her or even looking in her direction. I guess, but I wanted to get in some extra practice. With all the boys, it can be a pain to even get to fight someone, much less have room in the arena, she says as she looks at him. Plus it's like the only time I won't get judged by people like you, she says, and Izuku shakes his head no. No, I don't think you are wrong or anything. All I'm saying is it's late, and performance is best done when you sleep an okay amount, he says, and she looks at him, taking him by both of the shoulders, and she grinned. You don't think I'm wrong for wanting to be a knight? And no, you're just fighting for your country. It is rather noble, he says as he looks at her, and he smiled. He was supportive. Even though this girl was an alpha, they were still seen as less than a male alpha, and it took a lot of hard work to be on equal footing. She sighed and she let go of him. Okay, I see why Denki likes you. He thinks you are just great, she smiled. Well then, if we are both supposed to retire, why don't we go back together, Green Bean? As she asks as she looks at him, and she started to walk. He followed behind her, and she hummed. So how did he even manage to get a job here? And where has he been? I haven't seen him. Izuku says. Well, I think he may have bribed Nizu, I'm not sure, but he is working. I think he does cleaning and stuff. I'm not actually sure either. He uses his mouth more for making out with his boyfriend than talking, she shrugged, and Izuku laughed a bit. It was easy to talk to the pink-haired girl. She stopped in front of his door and smiled. This is my stop, Izuku says, and he looks at her. Listen, Mina, just keep going and be yourself. I think you will be a great knight, so don't worry, he says as he smiled, and he walked out of the room, and he walked inside. Thank you, Izuku, and you too, Keep being great, she smiled before walking off, and Izuku groaned, flopping over in bed, so he laid face first in the silk pillows. The next 2 weeks passed with no issues. He attended class, ate lunch with his friends, which now included Ochako but EW. Izuku just didn't trust her yet, though she did seem like she wanted to be friends. He hummed as he stood out of the large field. He was dressed in some pants and a white shirt, and the other students were also dressed up. Any idea what we are doing today? A girl asks as he looks at him, and after a couple of moments, Professor Yamato walked onto the field, and he smiled. Greetings, little listeners. So as you know, familiars can help a magic user with every aspect. They are emotional cornerstones and come in handy. We have gotten a few people to tell you about theirs, but then we will let you get your own. It can be a weird experience because familiars find you in different ways, but trust in yourself, and you should be fine. Izuku watched as Katsuki walked out, and he shoved his hands in his pockets. Shinso was there as well, and even Todoroki. Izuku hummed as he looks at them. Shinso spoke first. "This is my familiar Mimi," he says as a part of the dark-haired boy's shadow separated itself from him and poofed into a black cat. "You think that's cool, huh?" Katsuki says as he lifted his arm out, and a bird flew down, landing on his arm. It was a hawk. He hummed as he glanced at Todoroki, and he saw a red and white fox nuzzling against his leg. However, Yuzuku was not paying any attention. A girl from his class who was rather nice when he had first met her had been acting strangely for the last 2 days. Her name was Kami. His attention was brought back to the group as Todoroki spoke. Different familiars reflect who you are inside, such as rabbits prove innocence and light and snakes are deceitful. He says, you may not find your familiar for a while, but when you do, just return. You will be going into the woods over there. If you can't find your way out, you all know the flare spell. Izuku sighed as a spell circle surrounded them, which meant the game was starting. They would all be separated, so he would be alone. When he opened his eyes, he was in the woods. He glanced beside him and saw Kami. She glanced at him and smiled a bit. "Let's get going," she says, her eyes glowing tinting yellow. Izuku took a deep breath as he looked around, and he looked at Kami. "Where are we going anyway? I mean, shouldn't we be, separated?" he asks as he followed her, and she shakes her head. "No, I know someone who did this, and she said you could find your familiar faster the deeper you go into the woods," she says as she looks at him, and she leads him to a patch of woods that seemed like it covered the sky fully. Izuku squeaked a bit when he bumped into her, and he steps back. "Why did we stop?" he asked, and she smiled brightly, looking back at them with glowing yellow eyes, and she giggled. He took a couple of steps back and he gulped. "Kami dash," he says, "come on, this isn't funny. We have something we are supposed to be doing. Why are your eyes like that?" "Oh, you light users are just so gullible," she says, and she laughed as Izuku's vision started to blur, and soon he felt his head hit the floor. When he opened his eyes, he groaned as he tried to reach up and rub his eyes, though he couldn't. "Hee, look at you, it took you so long to wake up," a voice says, and he looks up, seeing a blonde girl with blonde hair and yellow eyes. She had fangs. As his eyes trailed down, he did not see hips and legs, but he saw a tail, a snake's tail. "You are going to be so yummy when I eat you," she says, and she grinned. He looks at her. "Who are you?" "What happened to Kami?" he says, and she giggled, liking her lips as she slithers around him, the hold tightening around his diaphragm, and he choked out slightly because of the tightening. "Kami, I ate her," she giggled, and she licks his neck, causing Izuku to shiver a bit, struggling. "Just like I am going to do with you," she says, and his eyes widen. He looks at her and he shakes his head, struggling. "It's been a week. I stole her place just to find you, though I can't eat all of you. Maybe I can have a small bite." "No way, I am not going to die yet," he says, and he got one arm free, punching her in the jaw. She hissed and moved back, and Izuku ran. He ran as fast as he could, and he didn't want to stop. His breath was rushed as he sped through the woods. Branches slapped against his face and scraped his skin, making him bleed a bit as he ran. He could hear the rustling following behind him. Tears rolled down his cheeks as his foot caught on a branch and he fell on his face. He needed to keep going. He managed to push himself up, and he jumped into a bush. He saw Toga stop in front of him, and she sniffed the air. "Oh, Izuku, come here, little bunny," she says. I smell you, she says, slithering past him. There had to be something he can do. He closed his eyes tightly, and everything went quiet. When he opened his eyes, everything was dark except for a glowing white light. He saw a white lion in front of him. It was huge, and its mane looked fluffy. A lion, he murmurs. For justice, loyalty, and bravery, he murmurs, and the lion steps closer to him, pressing its snout against his forehead, and he closed his eyes again. Found you, Toga says, grabbing his leg and throwing him up in the air. Izuku used this, and when he fell, he rolled onto his side, and he grabbed the small blade from his holster. I'm no dead man walking, he glared, and she smirks a bit. Come at me if I die, I am taking you with me. Izuku looked at the snake woman, and he breathed in deeply. He did not know why he could not just fight this woman. Yes, she was strong, and he was fighting the urge to give in and just sit there and get eaten, but he stood there, his feet planted in the ground. He missed his homes. He missed his dogs. He missed his dad even. He held the dagger, and his breath shook as he glanced at some vines. Maybe he did not have to kill her. Maybe he could somehow get her tied up? He bolted to the tree, and Toga hissed slightly, looking at the blonde girl with fire in his eyes. He hoisted himself up in the tree, and he looked down, wrapping the wine around his wrist 3 times and placing the dagger in his mouth. Do you really think that is any threat to me, Zuku? I don't think hiding has been working for you, the girl giggled, and Izuku swung down using the vine, so he had this swing effect, and he kicked her in the chest, knocking the girl over. After a long struggle, he had her hanging from a tree like a piñata. Who sent you? He says, holding his dagger to the girl's throat. She hissed slightly, trying to nip at him, though the white monster of a car sitting behind him made her stop. You see, familiars could be summoned. And well, cats are known to play with their food before they kill it. Cats were assholes, in all honesty. He had grown up with a cat that always sat on the fence near his home in his past life. The cat would hiss at him whenever he would try and pet the tiny creature. But he had always liked cats. Who sent me? Well, that's none of your business, she says, and she swung a bit. Izuku sighed, and he pressed the dagger to her throat, causing the smallest amount of blood to drip, and she glared. Listen here, Bich, he says, dropping the polite tone he usually used around people because he was really just in no mood to deal with murder attempts at the moment. I have made a lot of choices to avoid dying before or even when I turn 18, he says, and he pulled his knife back, turning away. But I am not a killer, he says as he walks off. Before he could even get 3 feet away, her tail whipped to him and scraped his cheek. He felt some blood dripping down his round cheek, and he glanced back at her, but the snake woman was gone. Another puff of smoke broke him from his senses, and when he opens his eyes again, he was back in the field. Izuku, you're bleeding, Ochako says as she cupped the green-haired boy's cheek and she wiped off the blood. There was something in the woods, a snake woman, she was pretending to be Kami, he explained as he looks up to see Katsuki jogging up to him, and he bent down, grabbing the boy by the shoulders. Kaken, he says as he looks at him in his ruby eyes, and Katsuki cursed under his breath as a wave of dizziness washed over him, and he found himself leaning into the mail as everything went black. When he woke up, he was in the infirmary room. Kaminari smiled as he replaced the wet rag that had been on his forehead. Izuku, I mean Sir Midoriya, you are finally up, he says, and he sits on the bed looking at him. How are you feeling? He asks, stopping the green-haired boy as he started to get up. Whoa there, buddy, try and stay in bed. You have been asleep for 3 days, he says, and Izuku looks at him with wide eyes. 3 days? What happened? He asks as he looks at the mail. He didn't know what happened, and he felt like the others should be answering his question instead of sitting there like a cute idiot. Denki pushed the other to lay down again, and he sighed. So the snake used poison when it stole some of your blood, we had to SCK the venom out, and your body used up a lot of mana summoning your spirit for the first time, so because of that adding onto the poison, you just kind of had to take a long refreshing nap to heal up, he says, and Izuku nodded looking on the floor to see the lion curled up on the floor playing with a gerbil. What is my lion eating? 2nd, am I going to die? 3rd, where have you been? And 4th, how much class have I missed? He asks as he looks at the blonde who smiled, and he looks at the male picking up the small gerbil, and he looks at the male. This is Sparks, he is my familiar. Yes, even people like me have them though they aren't as smart or strong as yours. He is the best friend I could ever have, no offense. Second, you are not going to die. We got all of the poison out. Third, you are okay with classwork. And last, I have been getting busy with my lover Denki spoke, and Izuku cut him off. Whoa, I don't want to hear about your CC life when I still have not done anything, he joked, and Denki smiled. No, dude, we have been busy. We kind of have an idea. About something kind of less than fortunate, he says as he looks at the mail and he leaned on the table. So, I think someone is out to get you. I don't know if it is to hurt you or what, but please don't leave your room at night anymore, he says as he looks at the mail. Izuku nodded, and he sighed, and the mail hummed, leaning in slightly, and he gave the green-haired boy a small kiss on the lips. Izuku pulled away and covered his mouth. Kei Kaminari, he says as he looks at him, and he covered his mouth, blushing, and Denki giggled. I kind of made it a point to steal all of my friends' first kisses. He winked, and he stands up. Be careful, he says, and he pats his head, walking out, leaving Izuku there. Kaminari, I swear, he says chapter text. Izuku tapped his fingers against the wooden desk he sat at. He listened to his teacher blabber on about spells and charms. Kaminari was a JRK. How could he just say he thought someone was after him and not give him any details? He wanted to at least know if they had any ideas on who this person could possibly be. As the lessons for the day ended, he packed up his bag, and he was getting ready to walk out when Aizawa grabbed him by the back of his shirt and made him take a couple of steps out. He looked back at Aizawa and smiled sheepishly. Wait just a moment, Midoriya, he says, and Izuku turned to face him. He gave the male an innocent look, and the older male sighed. I need you to decide if you want to go to the city or not this weekend, he says, and Izuku nodded. He had thought he was in trouble or something. Yes, sir, I didn't know about a class trip, but I think going to the city would be fun, he says, and he smiled. Is there anything else you need to ask about? He says. His teacher nodded, and he grabbed his feathered pen, and he scribbled down a number. He handed it to the male, and he leaned back on the desk. What is this? A room number, he asks, looking at his teacher, who nodded. A teacher wants to speak with you. I don't know what it is about, he says. If anything happens, you come to me, but it will probably be fine, he says, glancing at the clock that hung on the wall. You should hurry if you want to make it on time, he says, and Izuku nodded, stepping out of the room as he looks at the slop of paper. It read, 307. He had never been to that side of the campus yet. It was usually reserved for people who would become high mages. He knew he didn't have the talent to be a high mage, so he was somewhat confused about the whole ordeal. It was late afternoon, most of the other students would have been at tea time or training. His feet clicked against the marble floors, and he looked from door to door. He stumbled slightly as his foot caught on nothing, and he went tumbling to the floor, though he felt himself get stopped by two arms that hoisted him back up. He looked up to the unpleased eyes of Shinso Hitoshi. Why did this guy hate him so much? Denki had made up with him, so he didn't understand why. You should watch where you are going. Someone won't be here to catch you every time you fall, he says, and Izuku nodded a bit, looking at the male up and down. Sorry, he says as he goes to walk away, but he stopped. He was not going to take the sheet. He had been so focused on saving his butt from the uncaring clutches of fate that he had made himself a lousy pushover to this guy. He turns, and he walks back up to the male. You know what, I am done with this. Shinso, why do you hate me so much? Kaminari and I made up, so it can't be that, and if it is, you hold grudges for way too long, he says. Do you know how much it is to be constantly glared at every time I walk past you? What is your deal? Because I am so dim and tired of not knowing, he says, crossing his arms. Shinso blinked a couple of moments before he mumbled something quietly, and he looked away. What? He asks. I can't hear you if you mumble, he says. I don't hate you, he sighed, and Izuku gave him a blank look. I did dislike you at first. You hurt Kaminari's feelings. Though you made up, then I see you with him all the time. It's almost as if you are going to just take him away from me, he admits. He's the only person who has never judged me for my magic. I don't want him to be hurt. Thus, you attractive and, well, you know, he murmurs, and Izuku burst out laughing. That was why Shinso was so against him? He smiled, almost crying from how hard he was laughing, and he took a deep breath looking at the male, and he spoke again. "Oh, Shinso, no, I am not going to take him away from you," he says. "Why would you think that?" "Because you're building an army of attractive men and women, and you will pull his butt into it because he thinks the world of you," Shinso says. Izuku just started to laugh again and he smiled. No, I am not doing that. First of all, I am trying to stay under the radar," he says, and Shinso gave him a look because the boy was not doing that at all. "I am doing the same thing you are. I don't want anything to happen to him. We are on the same side, Shinso. I'm sorry he hangs around with me, but we are friends. He's my only friend I don't have to be on guard with," he says. Shinso sighed, and he nodded, looking at Izuku. "Can we start over?" he asks. "Fine, just don't try anything," he says. "I'm on your side as well," he says. "Weren't you going somewhere?" he asks, and Izuku blinks. He gasps, and he starts running down the hall. "Crap, the time. We are talking about this later, Shinso," he yelled as he ran. 2 minutes later, he arrived at a door, and he knocked on it. He was out of breath and gasping for air as he spoke. I got the note," he says as the door opens, and he sees a skeleton man standing there. "Hello," he says, and the man nodded. "Come in, my boy, we have a lot to talk about," he says, and Izuku nodded as he walks in and he sat down at a table. There was some tea and muffins set out. They did smell good. The skeleton man sat down and hummed. "My name is Yagi," he says. "I have wanted to talk in person with you for a while, my boy," he says. "You got my notes, correct? I will admit it wasn't the best way of communicating, but I knew it would be hard to get your teacher to let me talk to you," he says. "Why you wrote the letters, the one about my secret? How I know what Japan is?" he asks, getting a nod. "Are you from there as well? How did you get here then?" he asks, and Yagi sighed, speaking again. "That I am not sure of. Unlike you, I was not born again into a new body. Yes, I am from Japan. However, I was summoned," he says. "I never died," he explains. "You probably have no idea about this. People in the High Council summon beings from other worlds. I am from Japan like you," he says. "Think of it as a movie reel. It is all in one timeline. Yet, if you break it apart, it splits in two. There are so many possibilities then," he says. "I was studying this before I was taken here," he says. "And yet you were born again," he says, and Izuku nodded. "I have no idea why what happened to me happened. One moment I am dying in an ally and the next I wake up as a green-haired baby," he sighed. "I guess before I died, I did have a wish," he says. "I haven't thought of it because there was so much going on, but there was a voice. It asked me if I was satisfied. I answered truthfully," he says. He remembered it. Clearly, it had been so cold, it was dark, he did not open his eyes, but he knew he was floating in an ocean of nothing. That's when he heard him. That voice. It sounded so warm and wise. "Are you satisfied?" "No," he said. "Why is that? I never get to live a life of my own. It always ends too fast. It is always painful," he says. I wish I could be happy. Do you want to try again?" "Yes, I want to be happy," he says. "I don't want to suffer again." "So be it." Izuku shook his head, and he looks at Yagi, and then "Well, I woke up," he says, and Yagi nodded. "But I know what happens in this tale. Everything is changing," he says. "In some ways, but I don't know. Will I end up dead like what I knew happens?" he asks as he lays his head on the table and Yagi pats his shoulder. "I do not know," he says. Izuku watched in amazement as Kaminari chattered on. However, he wasn't amazed by the blonde boy but instead what he was doing. You see, Kaminari was in charge of tacking up the dragons. Yes, dragons. UA Academy for Magic was more or less famous for their dragon riding team. Izuku was not too familiar with the game, but it reminded him of a mix of American football and fencing. He knew Katsuki, Mina, and Karishma were on the school's team. What they did was they flew around on dragons with a ball as well as swords. Kaminari hummed as he let a giant dragon nuzzle against his hand, and he grinned. "Anyway, shouldn't you be studying for midterm exams?" Kaminari asks as he looks at the boy, who shrugged. "I should, but I haven't been able to pay much attention when I sit down and try, he says, and the electric blonde nodded, and he hummed, thinking for a few moments before he spoke once again. I wish I could learn magic. I used to know some simple spells, but I forgot them since it's been a while, he says as he looks at him, and Shinso hummed a bit from a pile of hay he had been sleeping in ever since their encounter. Izuku had been spending a lot of time with Shinso and Kaminari. Even though Ochako would tag along at times, she had made more friends. Izuku liked his friends, and since he kept them all close and had even forced the other two to go out on dates, he did not doubt that Shinso could even fall for Uraraka. You need to learn how to pay attention, or you won't make it to next year. Even though you pay attention in class and do well, my parents make sure midterms are hard. They want to make sure the class is full of exceptional students. Shinso says as he opens one eye, and he looks at the boys. What do you mean, your parents? He asks, and Denki smiled like he knew something Izuku didn't. Which he did. He didn't know any professors with Shinso as their last name. Yeah. My adopted fathers, Professor Yamada and Professor Aizawa, he says as he looks at the mail, and Izuku's jaw almost dropped. It made sense. Aizawa and Shinso were similar in a way. He saw the doors to the barn burst open, and he glanced at the two people fighting with swords. Mina took steps back as she was on the defense. Katsuki smirks as he swung his sword at her, barely missing the pink-haired girl by a hair as she ducked just in time. Izuku thought she had the upper hand when she ran up the wall and flipped back over Katsuki and behind him, but she tripped over Katsuki's leg and fell on top of Shinso. Katsuki laughed as the purple-haired male pushed her off of him and Mina whined. You never let me win, Katsuki, she says, and she wiped hay off of her pants. Katsuki grinned, and he rolled his eyes. If I let you win, you would be effing dead by now, idiot, he says, and she rolled her eyes before looking at the others. Katsuki hummed as he ruffled Izuku's hair, and he looks at him. Are you going to watch us at the game tonight? He asks, and Izuku nodded. Yeah, I am going, he says as he looks at him, though I don't know what is so amazing about throwing around a ball. He sighed, and Mina gasps, looking at the Omega. Izuku never was a fan of sports, even when he was in his old life. He was never athletic or anything, so it never interested him. Well, it has sword fighting and flying on dragons. It's kind of amazing when you see it for the first time, she says, her eyes sparkling. She was passionate about it, and the boy could respect that. Katsuki grabbed her arm and started to drag her out of the room. Come on, don't bore him with your blabbering. We have more practice, he says, and she waves goodbye to the other three left in the barn. Izuku didn't know what he was watching, thought it was amazing. Everything went so fast. People zipped by on dragons, they were dogging swords, and the goal was just to get a ball in a goal. This is definitely interesting, he says, and Uraraka smiled as she placed her hands in her lap, setting down the spectacle that she had been looking through. I heard it can be rather dangerous, she says as their team scored a goal and cheering rung out. Katsuki smirks as he flew by, clearly very proud of himself. Though no matter how handsome Katsuki looked, he couldn't help but keep his eyes on the one bench player. Mina hadn't been put on the field. She was the only girl on the team, so he thought that might have been why. Though he didn't have to wait long, a dragon flew straight into another one, making the rider fly to the ground. Luckily it didn't cause too much harm, but it let Mina have an opportunity to play. At first, she wasn't getting thrown the ball, but she did really shine. When she did get the ball, she was like a fish in water. He was glad Katsuki had these friends, and he never thought of these people as three-dimensional before he had gotten to know them. Mina was no longer just a female character who was there to make the group diverse. Kaminari was no longer a boy who killed himself because of rejection. Kirishima was a kind, compassionate man who wanted to protect every good thing. Siro was a master of all things magic, and he was quite funny, and Katsuki. Hell, he did not trust that BSRD for a minute. But he liked him. Just a bit. He smiled as he watched the group hold up an award. These days, he could get used to it. Maybe he could let his guard down just a bit. Midterms, what a pain in the butt. Izuku doesn't think he had left his room for 2 weeks straight other than going to class. It was like the night of the living dead. No one was safe from the infection of cramming months of education back in his head. The male sighed as he leaned over his desk, and he rubbed his eyes. There were 3 parts to the test. The first was written, the second was a magic test, and the third always changed. Once, it was fighting demons. Another time it was an object called the fear box, which brought your worst fears against you. Izuku thought this was rather dangerous and the school should not be able to do this, but who was he to say that they couldn't? He had no power over the way they chose to run their school. He sighed as he heard a bell ring. It was time for dinner. He sighed as he stood up from his desk and he walked out of his room. He walked through the dimly lit halls of the school that just seemed so dreadful at this time. He stopped and glanced to the left of him. He was at a fork in the road. There were 3 halls, one from his left, one in front of him, and one to his right. He saw the lights flickering in the darkness. He stared blankly only to be brought out of his trance by a hand on his shoulder, which caused him to flinch. "What are you flinching for? Do I scare you that much?" Katsuki asks as he looks at the boy, and Izuku took a deep breath. It was just Katsuki, not some monster that lurked in the dark part of the school. "Ah, it's just you. Sorry, I just haven't been sleeping much, too much work and nightmares," he admits as he rubbed his arm. "They haven't found Kami's body, but I guess it has just been keeping me up," he admits, and Katsuki nodded, taking his hand, and he started to drag him. "Kaken? Where are we going?" he asks. "Kitchen," the alpha says. "I am making you cocoa," he says. "My dad always made it for me when I couldn't sleep, plus if you are sleep deprived, you will fail midterms," he says, and Izuku sighed just letting the boy drag him to the kitchen. He smiled a bit, and he walked behind him. "You would never kill me, Kaken," he says, and the other paused, looking back at him with confusion on his face. "Why would you ever even think I could?" he asks. "You are my weakness, Deku," he says as he looks at the boy. "My flower of death," he says. "Even pretty things could be deadly." He nodded as he walked to the counter in the abandoned kitchen, and he sits on it. People of nobility never were known for using the kitchen, but he knew that Akatsuki liked to cook. Maybe it was him being paranoid about the future because someone could poison him or something. "You haven't cooked with me since we were kids," Yusuke says as he looks at him, and he smiled a little. Katsuki tisked, and he heated up the stove. Katsuki turned around, and he put both hands on either side of the boy's legs, looking up at him. Izuku blushed slightly as he glanced back at the boy, and he spoke again. "Kaken," he asks. "Deku," he says, "do you really not notice me? How do you see me?" he asks, looking at the younger male sitting there. Izuku was more or less very confused because he had no idea what the boy was talking about. "Kaken, what are you talking about? You know I see you as a great person, you have always been wonderful," he says, and the alpha grits his teeth, shaking his head. "That's not what I mean, Deku," he says as he looks at him. "How do you feel about me?" he says. "Am I attractive?" he asks. "Do I appeal to someone like you?" he asks. Izuku blinks, and then he nodded his head. The boy must like someone. Was it Ochako? This was great. That meant that he could show that he won't interfere with their relationship. "I think you are handsome, Kaken. Anyone would be lucky to be with you," he says, and Katsuki smirks. He pulled away and handed the boy a cup of cocoa. "Then go to the dance with me," he says. "Sure, I would love to go with everyone," he says. Little did Izuku know Katsuki now thought that Yusuke was his date to the dance. Izuku was clueless for someone who was so smart. Katsuki liked him. Izuku, he liked the blonde as well, but, he was too stupid to know it. That night Yusuke slept the best he had in a while. After a few days, midterms had crept up like a shadow as the sun passed through the sky. Izuku sighed as he sat at his desk filling out answers to the written exam he had to take first. Everyone was scribbling. The sound of the clock ticked like a bomb. Izuku finished up rather quickly. That was the easy part. Next was magic. He had been practicing his magic circles so much that his hands were probably permanently stained with chalk dust. The written exam was 15% of the grade. Then the magic was 30%, leaving the rest to fall on the last event, which would be the most difficult. Again the magic part passed by fine with no issues arising, but now he stood in front of a cave. Other students held their wands nervously as they were each explained what they would be doing for this part of the test. The cave has many tunnels. Each will take you through different aspects of your lives. It hurts, It draws out the most traumatic things that have happened. If you are strong, you will be able to get all the way through. If you are weak, well, you can pack your bags, Aizawa says. This separates the true people who should be here from the rest, he says. Izuku nodded. His life hadn't been too bad, so his mind, which would be creating what he would see, shouldn't be awful. Good people had raised him. The only terrible thing must have been what had happened with Kami. He walked in without a word and everything seemed to be fine. As he walked, it was just a normal cave, though when he turned a corner, he found himself in a room of mirrors. What was so scary about mirrors? He looked in one but did not see himself. His breath hitched as he looks at the person. It was him, but not Izuku. He looked in the next. There were 4. All him but not at the same time. This was supposed to be from this life alone, so why was he seeing them? Why did he see himself like this? He didn't know why his eyes became wet with salty tears. He heard their voices, their cries and the screams. I'm alone. Why doesn't he like me? It hurts. I'm no witch. Please, I love you. No one will ever love me. I'm alone. No one cares if I would just disappear. Izuku sank down to his knees, and he covered his ears with his hands, closing his eyes tightly. No, stop, he murmurs. That's not true. It was never true. It was that it was always true. We killed ourselves. Why didn't he come to help me? Why don't they want me? I'm alone. I'm alone. Black liquid started to dribble out from the ends of the mirrors. It filled the room, and Izuku sat there, his knees to his chest. The black liquid filled up the air, and he floated there. There was nothing, no light, no hope. Why did he always have a life that ended in misery? It never went right. Maybe he should just stop trying. You are giving up already, a voice said. It was the same from when he had died. Izuku sighed. What's the point? What is the point? There is none that no one would really care if I was here or not. I am so tired that life after life goes to waste on me, he murmurs, chains clicking around his arms. Is that true now? Yes, he says, feeling himself as he felt himself being pulled down deeper from the chains. Humans are really so blind that they don't see what is in front of them. You are your own fate, the voice says, and Izuku pressed his hands to his ears harder. You don't think I know that? Leave me be. Look at me, lost soul. I said look. Izuku's gaze shot up, and he saw his lion, white light illuminating the black gunk that surrounded him. Izuku teared up a bit, and he wiped his eyes. What do you know? I try. I really do. Everyone leaves in the end. Why was I taken here? Why can't I just rest? Who loves me? He asks, and the lion spoke once again. You know, there are people, you are loved no matter what you think. Life is not easy, the lion says. You are the one who wanted to live again. Do you not remember? Deep down, you know, all of you, you know you can find happiness for yourself. The lion says. You really think I can? He asks, and the lion stepped forward, pressing its head to Izuku's, and he closed his eyes. He smiled and he closed his eyes, and the chains started to break. When he opens his eyes, he was back in the cave. He blinked and he touched his arms. He stands up and he walks to the end of the cave, grabbing a gem that had been placed there. He was going to get a happy ending, no matter how hard he had to try. He was not going to regret another life. He walked out of the cave with the gem, and Uraraka looked at him smiling and she ran to him, hugging the boy. You back, she says, and he smiled, nodding his head. Let's stay friends, okay, Ochako? He asks, and she nodded. Of course, she smiled. How did he pass? A voice asks, swiping the magic ball off the desk, and he glared, looking at the mist man standing in front of him. He isn't supposed to know magic, they hissed. Master, calm yourself, he won't be there forever. Destiny doesn't have that plan for him. No one can defy fate. You better be right, or it's your head. Izuku had never had fun at a school dance. Dances were for popular people. They were for people with friends and who tended to be happy people. So, therefore, he had never been. Izuku looks at the outfit that was laid out for him. Do I have to wear this? He asks, looking at Denki, who was lying in his bed. Denki nodded as he looks at the male. Yes, it's winter, and it's like tradition, Denki says as he sits up and he stretched a bit. You're lucky that you get to go, he says. I want to go to a dance and kiss Shinso under the mistletoe, he says. I love the holidays, he says happily. Through his years, Izuku had learned that this place did not have Christmas. They did have a holiday through, it was called Eve. You gave gifts to people, but no Santa or reindeer delivered presents to all the good boys or girls, though there was a tale of an evil beast that takes away naughty children in a sack and eats them. A fun tale. Why can't you go? I'm sure they will let you go to an Eve party, he says as he pulled on his dress. He didn't like all these fancy clothes. He had never gotten used to it. It was a miracle that they let him wear pants on a typical day. I don't think Aizawa will care much, he explains, and Denki blinks a couple of times. I'm not allowed, like I said, this is a traditional party. Servants aren't allowed to attend, he says. People are coming from other schools around the area, and it wouldn't look proper if a servant was talking to a lord or lady other than taking orders, he says. People aren't all lucky to be born into the lap of luxury and fed with a silver spoon from the moment they are born, he says. I guess you are right, he says. How about you sneak in, he says, and Denki stands up, helping Yusuke button up the back of his dress. It's not a terrible idea, you know, he says, and Denki only smiled. You're too kind for me, he says. I really can't. I will probably just stay in the kitchen and shove cookies down my throat, maybe drink some apple cider, he says. Izuku sighed, knowing that there was nothing he could possibly do to change the boy's mind on the matter, so he smiled as a knock was heard, and Izuku hummed, walking to the door and opening it. Katsuki stood there with some flowers in his hands, and he looked at Izuku. You look nice, he says. Izuku smiled a bit, and he nodded. The boy was dressed in a black shirt with a plaid skirt attached to it. It looked like it could be a skirt with a sweater even though it was a dress. The skirt was shorter in the front and went to just below his knees, whereas the back of the skirt went to his ankles. He also had on some heeled boots, and in the back of his hand, a red bow was clipped to his green curls. Thanks, you don't look too bad yourself, he says as he looks at him. What are the flowers for? He asks, and Katsuki shoved them into Izuku's hands. Kaminari, can you put these flowers in water for me? He asks, and the blonde nodded, taking the flowers to go and put them in a vase. Ready to go? He asks, and Izuku nodded, taking his arm as they walk. I like you a lot, he murmurs, and Izuku smiled. He knew Katsuki thought of him as a great friend. Izuku is a dumb person for someone so clever. I know, Kaken, and I like you a lot too, he says as he walks to the ballroom where people were already having a great time. Izuku smiled though he saw a blob of brown running to him, and he blinked as Ochako body slammed Katsuki to make him stumble to the side. She then grabbed Izuku and hugged him. Izuku, you look so great, she says, and Izuku chuckled awkwardly. I thought you said you didn't like parties, she says, something about a girl getting pig's blood thrown on her at something called a prom? And that you feel like one of these days you would be that girl, she says. That came from when Izuku was explaining the book Carrie. That was from a novel, he says, and she made a sound of realization as Todoroki walked over. This was a strange kid. They hadn't talked much, but Izuku always saw him looking from afar. Midoriya, Todoroki says. May I speak with you over some eggnog? He asks in a serious tone. Izuku nodded a bit nervously, and he stepped forward, but Katsuki grabbed his arm. He's my date, dumb, but half and half. Just because you are a prince doesn't mean you get to take whatever you want, he says, and Todoroki didn't even respond. Kaken, it's okay, he says, be with you, Rarika. I will be back soon, he says as he shakes the blonde off and he walks with Todoroki. So what did you need to talk about? He asks, and Todoroki sighed. Well, I don't think I have been a good boy this year, he says. And I am afraid he will take me away, he says. Huh, he asks. You know that the beast, I don't want to be taken away in his sack and eaten, but I think I haven't been good, he says. Todoroki, that's a story mothers tell their kids to make them behave. It's not real, he says, and Todoroki shook his head. You know it's fake, right? He asks, and the other looks at him dead but in the eye and says. I saw him once, the beast, he says as he looks at the boy. I think he took my brother away, or it was my father, but I saw what I saw, so tonight I need to be on my best behavior, he says as he looks at the maid who just nodded. I am off to make amends, he says as he walked off, leaving Izuku confused. What was that about? Mina asks, sipping from a glass. Mina, Izuku says. She had on a very nice suit, and it looked great on her. She smiled and he spoke. Something about the beast, he says. You know you left Katsuki over there all by himself, as his date, you should hang out with him, she says as she started to push him back to Katsuki, and he looks at her. What do you mean date? He is not my lovey-dovey date, he says, and she ignored him. He then found himself alone with Katsuki again. Kaken, he says as he sighed. I need to ask a couple of questions. Why did you ask me on a date when you like someone? He asks. Was it to make them jealous? He asks, and the male shook his head. No, it's because I like you, he says. Yeah, I know you like me, Kaken, I like you too, he says. Dumb but, Katsuki says, I love you, he says. Huh. I said I love you like a lot, he admits, and he sighed, ever since we were kids, he says. I want to be with you so dash. He paused as he leaned in and he kissed Izuku on the lips. Izuku closed his eyes, and he found himself melting into the kiss, though he pulled away and he blushed. Idash, he paused before he heard a slapping sound, and he saw Ochako standing there. She had slapped Katsuki, though at what? How dare you, Katsuki? You know I like him, she glared. Izuku, don't listen to him, I love you more, she says. Please, like an omega, could satisfy him, Katsuki says, and she glared. Oh, I also am like Izuku. Kirishima says, smiling, what are we doing? I enjoy Ho's presence too, Shinso murmurs, though he meant platonically. That didn't go unheard from the window where Denki was listening in. What? Denki says, Izuku, how could you, he says. Platonically, Shinso added, and Denki smiled. Oh, same, Denki agreed. What is going on? Izuku murmurs. I have to go to right now, he says as he shuffled away out of the ballroom. This was not how it was supposed to go. Why were they not focusing on Ochako? He didn't like attention. Back when he had first gotten the novel, it had not been something he had been very interested in reading. It was a Sunday night. Being inside his apartment at the time did nothing to keep him warm from the harsh winds that January brought. He had sat down with his phone curled up in his thin blankets. Even though he didn't have many friends, he did talk to people occasionally. When he had been bagging groceries at the store, he overheard two teenage girls talking about this web novel. Ever since his boyfriend had left him behind, he hadn't had much else to do in his spare time, so he had decided to read. He didn't know what had drawn him into the novel. Maybe it was the thought that in the end, bad people had it coming. That karma was real, and people got what they deserved. Izuku had read every update for a year and a half. Even in his darkest times, he could still have some hope, even when he was kicked out of his apartment because he had gotten fired, and even when he had to survive the night shivering and wet from the rain. Are you still reading that garbage, Mikumo? A gruff voice said as his phone got swiped away from him. The black-haired boy blinked a couple of times, looking at the older male in the room, and he chuckled lightly. This stuff will FNG rot your brain, you idiot, he said. Come on, there are only 3 more chapters, Mikumo says as he reached out to grab his phone, only for a cold, rough hand to wrap around his wrist, and he jolted away, rubbing his now red wrist. Sorry, he says as he looked down. How can you read this stuff? Romance things? Those are for little girls with big dreams, not for people like you, a loser who can't even keep a job, so you read this RDC sheet to get off? Does the thought of love make your tummy fill with butterflies? It's time for you to learn, love isn't if and you're real, and you of all people won't ever get any, he said, and Mikumo gulped down a sour taste in his mouth. You know I just can't deal with you today, the man said. And he threw the phone back at the black-haired boy. Go get me some beer and be back in 30, or I'll know you are doing something else. Remember, you are only staying here because I am letting you. That means you better appreciate me. Yes, uncle, he said as he stood up and he walked to the store. It was that night that effed it all up. Maybe that's why he couldn't accept what was happening now. Why were they said they loved him? What kind of messed up sheet fest was that supposed to be? Love wasn't something that was a reality for someone like him. Maybe for someone like Kaminari who had Shinso, they could have love, but yet again, they were characters in a book. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen, and it was messing him up. Ochako was supposed to love Katsuki. Why did they both like him? He grumbled as he crouched down and he pulled at his curls. Think I can't just be with Katsuki, that I can't be with Uraraka either, that decline liking them, he murmurs as he blinks. This wasn't even the same book. What had to be done? Izuku, wait, he heard, and he looked back, seeing Ochako and Katsuki run up to him, and Izuku groans. God, leave me alone, please? I'm not supposed to be the one you like. Both of you have lost your minds. You like mosquitoes constantly buzzing around me. Just shut up. I don't like either of you, Ochako. Why are you even here? You are just some farm character that's supposed to be followed like some peacock. I never knew why, since you look so plain and kakin. What the F has you following me like some sort of puppy dog? It isn't cute. It's weird, he says. You don't love me? So stop saying it. You don't even know what love is. Midoriya, calm down, okay? Ochako says as she looks at him. I think you are just frustrated, Ochako says. Katsuki huffed as he looks at the boy, and he glared slightly. I got his answer. Thanks for effing turning me down nicely, you little sheet. Do you want to know what is sad? Having a dad who doesn't even care about you enough to show up to any conference, he says. And you know what? I realize I just felt sorry for you, he says, and he huffed, and he walked off. Come on, Ochako, Katsuki grumbled, and Izuku gapes slightly. Wait, Izuku says, and Ochako sighed, turning, and she rubbed her arm. That wasn't cool, Izuku. We do all love you a lot, but that I'm sorry, she says as she walks off, following the boy. Izuku looked at them leave, and he stood there as rain started to fall down, and a cool wave of air flew by him. He hadn't heard from his father in a while. Was it true? He had started to think that his father had cared about him. What was even the point of staying in this place? Well, winter break was starting. He could just leave a bit early. He walked to his room, walking past Todoroki, who was setting up a mousetrap. He stopped as he got to his dorm, and he scribbled down a note. It said that he would be spending time at his home for the break. Kaminari would find it soon enough. He sighed as he drew a magic circle, and he teleported to his manor. He fell to his knees as he landed on an old rub, and he coughed slightly as he watched the dust settle. What are you doing here? He heard, and he looked up to see his father standing there. Izuku pressed his lips together, and he started to cry. Why was he crying? He wiped his eyes, and he looked at his father. Father, he murmurs as he looks at him. Why can't you love me? Look me in the eye, he says as he looks up at him, and he heard a sigh as his father looked him in the eye and spoke. I can't, and I don't know why. The whole time Izuku was on winter break, he felt empty. The story should be getting back on track soon. At least Katsuki hated him, and Ochako had a distaste for him. He had always wondered why his father had never done anything about his death in the book, of course. He hadn't loved him in the novel, but there was no avenging him at all. The next half of the year, he had stayed as far away as he could from most people. He had even pushed Kaminari away, and slowly things seemed to start going according to plan. Okako was friends with the main leads. He saw them hang out, and they whispered whenever he would pass by. Kaminari had been more distant, though he still tried to keep in contact. Of course he failed. Now 17 years old and back to square one, Izuku walked down the long empty halls of the school with a slight frown on his lips. He looked up as he heard a gentle whimpering, and he turns his head. Hello, he questioned, going to the sounds. He walked up a flight of stairs till he got to the rooftop. He opened the door, and he peeked out, seeing Blonde. Kakin, he murmurs. What was he doing up there? He took a couple of steps forward, and he grabbed onto the male's shoulder. Katsuki whipped his head around, and he glared. Don't FNG speak to me. I was just leaving, Katsuki says. He tore his arm away, and Izuku just placed his hand on the boy's arm. What do you FING want? I said, get lost, you dumb butt. I haven't been fair to you, Kakin, Izuku admits. I want to apologize, and I think you deserve an explanation, Izuku says, and he walked over to the bench sitting down. You can join me or not. He says, it's up to you, he says. Katsuki seemed to hesitate, but he slowly walked over, and he sat down next to the green-haired boy. Then Izuku began to spill. He told him how he came into this world, and he knew the outcome of his original fate, though he left out the whole part of this being a novel he read. When he finished explaining, he said, "So I guess I didn't mean what I said about the whole you annoying me to death, that I'm scared of what is going to happen to me. I care about you guys, and I have been so caught up in trying to keep myself safe that I hadn't realized how fate has changed unless I am still to die. At your hand at 18. He says, "So you're telling me that you saw the future when you were younger, and you saw me killing you, and that's why you have been so weird?" Katsuki asks as he looks at the boy. Izuku had not told the whole truth, but this was the best way he could do it without the blonde calling a crazy person doctor on him and having the green-haired boy sent off to a nunnery where he could live out his crazy days being a nun and making offerings to their gods. "Is that so crazy?" he asks, and Katsuki shakes his head. "I believe you," he murmurs as he looks at him. "It hurt. I've liked you for a long time. But I don't think I can just move on from this. That vision you had is fake. I am never going to kill you. Your father is a piece of shit that is taking advantage of our kingdom. Izuku, parents don't care about their kids. Hell, my mom is a bich," he said. Izuku smiled slightly and he nodded. "So that I do love you, Izuku, but if you don't feel the same, we can stay friends," he sighed as he looks at him, and he reached over, taking his hand. "You did look like a potato when I first met you though," he says. "Come on, Kaken, I just think you need glasses. I wish I came around earlier. What am I going to do when you graduate?" he asks, and the other hummed before shaking his head. "Well, I'm going to war," Katsuki says as he looks at him, "and I hope you join me," he says as he looks at him, kissing the boy's knuckles before he sighed. "Go apologize to Pink Cheeks, okay? And on that note, watch out for your electric friend. Yes, been coming up here every day, and I've been watching him go closer and closer to the edge every day at 4. You can take care of it and just make sure he doesn't. You know? What happened? He wasn't like this before," Izuku says, and Katsuki looks at him. "He's always been like this." "What are you talking about, Deku?" he asks. "I think he does something inside of him keeps making him have those thoughts, and with the recent breakup," he murmurs, and he looks at him. "What? He and I bags split. They kept fighting about you. He kept saying you were a good person, and Sheet and Shinso or whatever his name was disagreed and told him to get over his stupid friend crush with you, or they broke up. It's been 2 months. They broke up because of me?" he asks, and Katsuki nodded. Izuku felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He had been pushing away his best friend, who was the one who needed him the most at this time. He had been the reason they broke up. He was going to make this all right no matter how long it took to do that. War is a tricky thing. It brings dishonor, hardship, death, and pain. Pain that can swallow someone up. You see, war doesn't start from nothing, it builds up, like a leaky pipe. Every drip creates a puddle, and the puddle will slowly grow if it wasn't dealt with. Like the seasons, how summer turns into fall and then winter and then spring, it's a balance. There cannot be peace without sacrifice. You see, Izuku knew that war was going to come. It happened in the book around 3 years before the beginning of it, and it continued through the book. Demons had starting to invade innocent cities and towns. People suffered daily because of crops that were ravaged due to monsters. Women and small children were taken from their homes and taken to either be killed or taken advantage. People wanted action, and the demons were not doing anything to stop this. If anything, they were promoting this war. However, he had never found out who the king of the demons was, since he has never gotten to read the end of his novel. The final showdown would never happen for him. What scared him the most, even though he had nothing to be scared of, what is a certain blonde would be going off to war with his generals. In the recent months since he had confessed some of his trauma to the blonde-haired boy, things between them had grown steadily. He even felt giddy when he would be able to talk to the boy. There was no more sense of nervousness around him. He had nothing to be afraid of. Instead of following the book's fate from the beginning, he had carved out his new fate. What is this? What people called feelings, not just friendship, and not a relationship where he could ignore these urges that welled up inside of him, the way the other strong jawline moved, in the way the boy's sweat glistens down his chest after a workout. No, I had to stop thinking about this. Even though he was know how to wear heels for the boy, he should have no interest in. He can't be thinking about this. The boy was his childhood friend. It's not like he could easily forget about the other boy that had followed him around like a puppy for the last couple of months. And with that, he reaches problem 2. A certain prince named Todoroki Shoto. The boy's feelings were a little confusing to understand. Maybe it was because his features were always so stoic. The boy was seeking him out for the silliest of things, like asking him what kind of beetle he was holding or wanting to know if snakes really had no legs or he just couldn't see them. It was kind of childish, but the other seemed to want any sort of attention he could get. But even though it was kind of pitiful, it was cute, like a baby puppy. Then there was problem C, Kirishima Aijuru. You see, the redhead dragon hybrid also admitted his feelings that night of the ball, and he had never lashed out at the boy, just avoided him. The boy would also be going to war along with Katsuki. He had been popping up everywhere with little gifts, but they weren't little gifts that you would expect, like chocolate or flowers. He would bring sticks and small pebbles. It was a dragon thing, he had asked Shisnu. Next up was Uraraka. She had been following him around as well. He had to duck to avoid her even though he wanted to be friends. She seems to be more interested in a committed relationship. She didn't even mind that he was an omega male. And he wasn't even safe around his old friends anymore because apparently, in the mixture of those couple months where he had gotten on good terms with everyone once again, Denki and Shisnu, mostly Denki, had done some reasoning with the other. The other either as a joke or totally serious. He could never tell if he wanted him to join their relationship for real or not. They both liked him, at least platonically. Still, they didn't really understand that he wasn't interested in being in a three-person relationship even though he loved you to death. He likes them like brothers even though that blonde-haired electric boy had stolen his first kiss. Because the whole story seemed to change, he didn't want to stay at the school while all of his friends fought in a war that he didn't even know who won it. He can guess that the heroes won because the heroes always wanted novels like that, so he wanted to help. That's why he was currently standing in front of his principal's office, and it was nearing the end of the school year, and the final year students were going to head off to battle. I want to join the war effort, he says. He stands in front of his principal. His headmaster looked at him and sipped a cup of tea. I know what you're going to say, but I don't have to fight on the front lines, and Mina has been teaching me sportsmanship, so I know how to defend myself. I am an outstanding magic student. I could help with faraway attacks or even healing. You could never have too many healers, right? He asks, even the prince, it's going. While I admire your determination to help in our war, are you sure this is where you need to be? You still have another year and a half of magic training even though you are far more advanced than your peers, and I doubt your father would want you to go, Nizu says. My father has personally signed a letter that I had sent telling me I have my own control of decisions that don't involve the house. This is my own decision and I wish to go, he says. He looks at him. The principal looked at him, and the determination in his eyes, it seems like a fire glowing in the dark night, the embers burning within him. As you wish, just sign these release forms, and I will get you all ready to go with everybody else at the beginning of summer. I hope you know what you're getting yourself into: harsh weather, tall mountains, monsters that want nothing more than to eat you. I am aware, sir, he says. He signed his papers, blowing his head in politeness before he turned on his heels and he left. As he walked down the hall, he was greeted with ash blonde hair and fiery red eyes. Akaken, good afternoon. What the hell? Is it true? Why are you going to war? He says in a scolding manner as he looks at the boy. He was displeased. You're going to get yourself killed and then wet. What if you get her on the battlefield? Then I will heal myself. I am perfectly capable of doing that, he says. He feels the other caging him into a wall, and he felt a wave of submissiveness wash over him, stupid instincts. He felt as if you were shrinking into his own shadow. The other scent washed it through the air, though he wasn't going to back down from this. Instincts be damned, he was human before he was any of the secondary genders, and the spirit guide was a lean for Christ's sake. I will be going to war and you cannot change my mind, he says. He looks at him with a slight glare on his face in the other, backed away, huffing a little bit so he can see the smile on his face. You really are all grown up. I hope your little legs can take all the hiking, he says. I have always kept up with you before, haven't I? I'll just keep doing it, and if I need your help, you'll come to me. Besides, I am fully capable of everything you can do, he says with a grin. Little did he know that even if the story completely changed on his 18th birthday, precisely 6 minutes from midnight, As the stars twinkle in the sky, he would look in the eyes that he held so dear and then down at the dagger plunged into his stomach. When the life sank from his eyes, the last thing he would see was that face. However, there wouldn't be a grin. Izuku Midoriya, a 17-year-old boy, looked at the face that would kill him, and he smiles because that face was the one he loved. That was the face he would die for. Chapter text. Izuku looks ahead of him, his eyes growing larger as he saw the many people surrounding the camp area. He had left school, but he didn't know if this was a good thing or a bad thing. He sighed as he sat down on a smooth boulder, and he grabbed the laces from his untied shoe before tying it in a bow. He remembered when he learned how to tie his shoes. He had been very young then, and Kurojiiri had told him a small rhyme to help him remember. As he tied his second shoe, he murmured this rhyme. Bunny ears, playing by a tree. Chris crossed the tree, trying to catch me. Bunny ears, jumped into the hole, popped out the other side beautiful and bold. Izuku, what is that? A familiar voice asks, and he looks up, seeing Kaminari crouched down in front of him, a smile on his face. The blonde-haired male tilted his head to the side as he looked down at his shoes. His electric yellow eyes were darting from foot to foot. I never wear boots with laces, I always trip over them, he says as he looks at him, and he smiled a bit more. Izuku liked the way the edges of the blonde's lips curved up when he smiled. His smile really was like the sun itself. Ah, hello Denki, Izuku says as he looks at the boy. It is not that hard really, it just takes some practice, and I was singing a small rhyme that tells you how to do it, he smiled. The blonde's eyes lit up like fireworks, and he grabbed the green-haired boy's hand in his own, nuzzling his cheek against it as he looked at the other like a cat. Denki, Izuku says, causing a small laugh to come from the playful boy. Yes, he says as he kissed his hand, and Izuku sighed because no. The blonde had a boyfriend. The issue was that the boyfriend was no better. The purple-haired male walked up to the two, and he looks back at Denki, grabbing him by the back of the shirt and pulling him back a bit, so he fell on his bottom. The blonde looked up at the sleepy guy, and he grinned. Hitoshi. Hello, love bug, he says, and he ruffled Izuku's hair. Hey Izuku, he says. Izuku had not expected the bunch of teenagers from his school to follow him from the academy to the battleground. Ochako, Todoroki, Denki, Shisnu, Kirishima, and Katsuki were all there. Your feet must be sore from all the walking. I can make a special bath salt for you that should help with the acing, Kaminari, and I would not mind helping you wash off, Shinso said, and Izuku's face went red. Another issue was how sexually charged these people were. Now that they had no problems hiding how they felt for the green-haired boy, they had no shame in suggesting XPLCT things. Kaminari rested his chin on the green-haired boy's knee, and he winked. Guys, no, I already said I am not interested in any of that stuff, he murmurs as he looks at them, and he turned his bright red face to the side so he could avoid looking at these people out of pure embarrassment that they would tease him once again. Well, the offer still stands, Denki says as he moved his chin. There were fewer people in the camp at the moment since a group of people had gone out to search the surrounding areas to make sure there were no enemies around ahead so they could keep moving. He heard a shout, and he looked over at the back of the mountain to see a group rushing back to them. Medic! We need a medic, someone said as some of the healers rushed ahead to check on the hurt people. Izuku stood up, and he tried to make his way through the crowd, but he bumped into Idru. He saw the boy was carrying a limp body on his shoulder, and he didn't look so well himself. Was that an arrow sticking out of his shoulder? Another healer took the limp body, and Izuku hurried to sit the redhead down. What happened? Kirishima, are you okay? Where is Kaken? Is he hurt as well? Izuku asks as he looks at him. This is gonna be painful, so just bear with me, he says as he pulled out the arrow, and he heard the other's breath hitch ever so slightly. Do not worry about me. I will be okay, and Bakugo is fine too, he says as he looks at the other. It does not hurt at all. It's just a scratch, he says, but the green-haired boy leaned in and pressed his lips to the boy's wound, watching the light come from it as it started to heal, and the other began to wrap it in some bandages. There was an ambush. 2 miles or so from here. We took care of it, though we didn't expect the attack. 5 fatalities and many injured, he says, and Izuku nodded. Why do you always ask about Katsuki when you talk to me? He asks, his tail swaying a bit, Do you like him more than me or something? I know you have known him for longer, but still. No, Kirishima, I like you just as much. Here, I have to help other people, but I'll come back. Rest okay and get something to drink? He says, grabbing a random pebble, and he handed it to the boy whose faces had lit up when he saw it. Before he could say anything, he ran off. Kakin? Kakin, where are you? He called as he looks around, and he came upon the blonde in one of the tents. Kakin? Kakin? Kakin, where are you? He called as he looks around, and he came upon the blonde in one of the tents. Kakin. Izuku looks into the tent, and his eyes widened as he looks at the male on one of the cots. He ran to the male, and he bent down, holding the boy's hands, squeezing it a bit as he looks down at the blonde-haired male. The blonde looked as if he had been to hell and back. There were blood stains on his loose white shirt, which had been thrown to the side and replaced with bandages. Hey, Deku, Katsuki says as he looks at the green-haired boy. I got shot with an arrow, he says, and Izuku sighed, smiling slightly as he looks at the male, and he nodded because he could clearly see that. I can tell Kakin, he says. The boy sat down on the end of the bed, and he looks at the boy. Katsuki tried to sit up, and Izuku shook his head, pushing him back down because he could not sit up at the moment. What happened? I thought only scouts were supposed to look around, he asks, and he tilted his head to the side before the blonde let out a groan, and he spoke again after a long breath. Well, everything was going fine, you know? We saw a couple of deer and so on, but then some demons came out of nowhere, many arrows came from the trees, and we weren't prepared, he says. They didn't get the chance to follow us back to camp, so don't worry, I need to go get my sword, he cursed. Izuku stood up, looking back at him, and he smiled after a few seconds. I can get it for you, Kakin. You said you cleared the area so that it will be okay, he says. He nodded his head before he walked out of the tent, not paying any mind to the other male trying to get him to stay put. He made his way out of the tent, and he walked through the camp and on the small hike to the area where Katsuki would have been, though it proved harder to find than he thought. It was like a needle in a haystack. Through the haystack was the forest full of vines and so on. He looked through the bushes for the sword, humming to himself to pass the time. He thought it was pointless and the sun was setting. He was about to give up when he saw something sparkling, and he walked to the area where he saw this. Ah, he says to himself, making his way behind a large rock that the sword had somehow gotten thrown behind. He grabbed it and yanked it out of the mud, holding the heavy sword in his hands. Look at you, he heard a deep voice say, and he looks up, seeing a figure standing on the boulder. He saw dark spiky hair and burns. He was in a dark trench cloak, and a mask was on his face covering his features. Izuku looks at him, and he swallows a bit nervously, but this man was not a demon, he could tell. There were no horns, no aura of anything but human, but he could sense darkness deep down in this boy's soul. Who are you? He asks as he looks up at the male, and he stepped back slightly. Are you part of the troops in the back? He asks as he looks at him. You know who I am, Green Bean, he says, and he hopped down from the rock, stepping forward. A bunny shouldn't be out at night all alone. It's just like you to do something like that, Izuku, he says. Izuku felt like this was very familiar. Remember me yet? He asks, and Izuku shook his head no. Then how about we play a little game? I ask you a question and you can ask me some until you figure it out. He asks, and he hummed. And well, Izuku nodded at this, and the male spoke. Why are you here all alone? He asks. Because I needed to get my friend's sword. He says, are you human? He asks. She looks at the male, and the guy laughed. I suppose, what do you call a man who sold his soul? Am I still human or something else? He asks, and he smirks a bit after he spoke again. Why are you here? You can't contribute much to this war. Because I can okay? I want to help end this faster. He says, sold your soul, you say, Itoya Todoroki? He asks as he looks at the male, and he nodded his head. There you got me, he says. It's just like when you were little, though the only difference is now you've become one of the kingdom's pawns, he says. How is my brother? Have you seen him? Yes, you work for the enemy, so why aren't you trying to kill me, Toya? He asks as he looks at him, and Toya narrowed his eyes for a second. He would kill me if I hurt you now, and second of all, don't call me by my given name, Dobby, that is what you should call me, he says as he grabbed the sword using his magic to melt the sword. Leave, or you won't like what is to come, he warns before he vanishes in a poof of air. What are you doing, Toya? He murmurs to himself. Izuku would be lying if he said everything was fine after his encounter with Toya Todoroki. He had never been close to him. He had not thought about the male for a long time, but why did he seek him out? Or did he even seek him out in the first place, that he could not be sure of? What happened to that kind teenager he had met in Witch's Ally all of those years ago? He sighed as he trudged through the thick mud of the mountain. It had been raining for 3 days, but they couldn't stay in place, or many people could get sick, or there could be a surprise attack. It had been 2 months since Katsuki had gotten hurt. He said he was fine, but Izuku had a hard time believing that. The green-haired boy sighed as he rubbed some rainwater off his face, and he looked over, seeing Todoroki walking next to him. Todoroki, hello there, he says as he looks at him. He had the same eyes as his brother. Izuku did not tell Todoroki that he had seen the missing man. How could you break the news that his brother had sold his soul to a demon to have the power to kill his father for all of the abuse he had suffered? When he read the novel and found out about the backstory of the bloodthirsty man, he never hated him. Dabi was not supposed to be a good character. He was supposed to be routed against, but that even though he did terrible things, Izuku didn't think that deep down he really was a bad person. And meeting the lost prince early on really placed the icing on the cake that he was good deep down. Todoroki smiled ever so slightly, and he walked beside him. Hello to you as well, Midoriya, the red and white-haired male says as he took the boy's hand, helping him step over a rather hard-to-see twig to prevent him from falling. Izuku glanced at him and smiled a little. How are you doing? You don't seem to be lagging behind, he says, and the green-haired boy nodded. He had been trying to stay near the front of the group. He didn't want to be seen as some kid just lagging on behind the group. He wanted to prove that he should be there. He wasn't the most talented healer. He had not been studying that kind of magic in school, but he was trying hard to prove himself nonetheless. I try and keep as much energy in me as I need. A good night of sleep is important for things like this, you know? He asks, and the male nodded a bit. How about you? I haven't seen you much recently. I heard that attack recently was pretty bad. You are a hero, you know? People are saying you got a lot of hurt people out of the area by yourself, Izuku says, and the boy nodded his head. Todoroki Shoto had never really been one for showing thanks when he was complimented. He sometimes acted like a cardboard box, to be honest. The boy was either very antisocial or just stoic, but he also was like a puppy dog, or at least Izuku thought he was. I guess, he murmurs. We will be entering the start of demon territory soon. I suggest you file to the back. That is what I came here to say, the prince says. For your own safety, he added. But Izuku says, trying to comprehend this. You need healers up here as well. What if something happens? He asks, looking at the male, a bit sad at this point because who was he to tell him that he had to stay in the back of the line? Is it because you think I am not strong enough to hold my own? I have done it before, he says, and Todoroki shook his head. It's not my orders, he says as he looks at him. It's the commander's, he says. Bakugo, Midoriya, I do not judge strength on secondary gender, I judge it on potential and drive, and to me, you have what it takes, but you have to convince Katsuki, he says as he looks at him. If you talk to Mina, you will most likely change his mind, he says. And that is just what he did. The next time they set up camp, he went to Katsuki's tent, which was reserved for the high-up people in the army, meaning Katsuki's officials. He walked in, and he glared, looking at the blonde who was making a battle strategy with Mina, Kirishima, and Shiro. You, he says. Deku? What the hell do you need? I'm kind of effing busy at the moment, he says, and Izuku walks up to him. Oh, he looks sad, Mina says, and Shiro chuckled. He had not met Shiro, he had not attended his school, but he knew Katsuki and his friends very well. Like Denki, he was not from their country, but they were a noble family that had moved. Therefore he was not treated as lowly as someone brought over as SLV like the blonde male would be seen. You better run, Bakugo, the black-haired male says, and he playfully nudged the boy, and Izuku took a deep breath before he spoke. Why would you want to push me to the back and now? What the hell, Katsuki? He asks, and the blonde sighed before he turned to the male, and he spoke. You know what? This is why you aren't physically capable of defending yourself, and no, I am not saying it because you are an Omega, I am saying it because you know what? He asks, pausing as he stands up and he looks at him. Come to my tent, you got it? And I'll tell you, but I am trying to plan something here, he says, and Izuku glared as he walked out. Later that night, Izuku made his way to Katsuki's tent, and he looked at the male seeing him seated on his cot. Kaken, he says as he looks at him and the make hummed, patting the spot next to him, and the green-haired boy sat down. I want to know why you are pushing me to the back, he says. You really want to know? I don't want you to get hurt. Demons don't care if you are nice to them, they have one goal, and that is to kill whatever is in their way, and I don't know why but I want to do this, Kaken, he says as he looks at him. The other's eyes were locked on his, and he didn't know why but he found himself leaning in, and soon his lips pressed against the other male's, and he closed his eyes. Smut warning, stop reading this chapter if you don't want to read it. The kiss became heated before too long, Izuku shifted over, and he wrapped his arms around his neck, feeling the other's rough hands snake around his waist and pull him close. He felt the other's teeth graze against his bottom lip, causing the green-haired male to open his mouth the slightest bit. Izuku let out a little as the other shoved his tongue in his mouth, and he closed his eyes. Maybe it was the tension or the stress, but he found himself lost in this kiss that deep down he knew he would maybe regret the next day, though he didn't understand why he had not been shoved away. He jerked slightly as he felt the male's hands sneak up his shirt and run his fingers down his chest. The other pulled away from the kiss and pressed his lips down the Omega's jawline, each kiss going down and down till it reached his collarbone. Kaken, he murmurs. Please, he says. He didn't know what he was asking for, but Katsuki soon pushed him against the bed and smirked down at him. Izuku was damn sure he was hard, you know what he was, and he knew this was wrong. Katsuki was his childhood friend, and yes, he had felt, but what would happen tomorrow? Though he forgot about tomorrow when he felt the other run his fingers down his stomach and looked at him when the other leaned down, pulling off his pants and pressed his lips to his whole screw tomorrow. The boy let out a loud and he covers his mouth as the other shoved his tongue inside of him. What was this? He couldn't recall this feeling. His legs trembled slightly as he turned his face to the side, shutting his eyes tightly as he tried to keep every sound he threatened to make inside of him. He heard a small chuckle from the male. Minutes passed and Izuku laid there a miming mess. He felt himself getting closer to release, but the male pulled his tongue out. And no, he murmurs, upset because the other had stopped. The blonde smirked, pressing 2 fingers inside of him, causing the boy to whimper slightly. You're already making tons of slick, he hummed, and he kissed his neck. I don't know if I even need to prepare you, he says as he pulled off his pants. Omega? That's when the other slowly pushed inside of him, and Izuku's eyes widen. Too big, why you're not gonna fit, he says, Kaken and not gonna and he felt the other start to move, and the green-haired boy's eyes rolled back as he tilted his head back, slightly miming loudly, Kaken, he cried. Shoo, you are doing so good, Deku, it's all the way in, you like it, don't you? I only you could see that cute face you're making, the alpha says as he started to pick up speed with every move. Izuku wrapped his legs around the boy's waist as he continued to Izuku nodded his head, and he gaps as he felt the other press against his pew. And Kaken, I'm alright he curling his toes, and Izuku saw stars. The boy couldn't help but lose his mind in pleasure as his brain turned to goop. He felt something in his lower stomach begin to form, his body heated with every move it got hotter and hotter. Close, he murmurs, and just like that he came on his chest miming loudly. The other continued to move, but he pulled out before this knot could form. Can't come in you, Deku, so why don't you escape me off him? He asks, and the boy whined a bit before he crawled close to him and he pressed his lips to the male's pee-pee, taking him into his mouth and sking on the tip of it. He felt the boy grab onto his hair through he didn't mind. He closed his eyes, and he began to bob his head, but soon the boy gripped his green curls and shoved his head down, making the boy GG a bit like the boy move into his mouth, and all Yusuke could do was look up at the male with tearful eyes as the boy's pee-pee hit the back of his throat. When he felt the other's warm cum in his mouth, he pulled away, coughing slightly, and they both look at each other. So, Katsuki says, and Izuku blushed. So, Izuku says back, can I be on the front lines, not as a favor for what we just did but… He murmurs, and the other sighed, kissing his forehead, and he nodded. Yes, fine, you pulled my leg, but if I say retreat, you do that, he says, and the boy nodded, hugging him. Thank you, Kaken. Izuku didn't know what had gotten into him that night, but it had been odd since then. They would meet up in the middle of the night or behind some bushes, and Izuku didn't know if he should be embarrassed or ashamed, but he couldn't find himself caring enough to change what he was doing. He sighed as he leaned against Kaminari, who was playing with his hair and borderline grooming him. And then I told him, well, we can just ask Izuku to F with us, and he said you would say no, but I think you would be into it, Denki says. Denki, I said now is not a time for things like that, Izuku says as he looks at the boy. This is a war, he added. This was bullshit, and he knew it since he was sneaking around with Katsuki every other night. Denki just shrugged and he leaned in, nipping at his neck, and he laughed, nuzzling against him. Denki liked scenting what he thought was his. This included Shinso, his blankets, his friends, and well, Izuku, which went under that friend category, or at least that's what he thought. Izuku let out a giggle because, well, it tickled, and he looks at the blonde who placed his head in his lap, looking up at the green-eyed boy. Come on, Denki says as he pressed his face into the boy's stomach, and Shinso sighed, stepping in and pulling the blonde from the boy's lap and placing him in his own, kissing the claimed mark on the blonde's neck. When had that happened, he hadn't been in the best touch with the boy since they left. Shinso, why can we do hanky-panky with him too? He whined as he looks at the purple-haired boy. Kami, we can't make him do anything, apparently Katsuki would probably kill us if we even tried. He says, Izuku, you should just to stop sneaking around with Katsuki. Kami and I are joking with you and all, but if you don't make this official some people might think you are sleeping around, the boy says a bit worried, and Izuku nodded. I know, I don't think Kaken wants to be with me like that though. He has more important things to do than court me or commit, Izuku says, and I don't think anyone is going to out of the way to have TC with me other than well maybe Kaminari, he joked, and Denki gave a thumbs up. I would shove my D in that a dash. Denki started before his mouth got covered, and he placed Denki liked the boy's hand though Esensu didn't give a crap since Denki was a biter. You have never F'd anyone, so don't get all cocky, Esensu says, and Denki huffed. But really just be careful, not everyone who is supposedly on the good side is actually good, he says. Izuku nodded because it was true, and he knew it. Not all people were really bad, and not all good people were good. Tamura Shigaraki was having a shitty time. These stupid humans were making their way into his territory. He couldn't FNG kill the blonde one even though he had sent a couple of people to ambush them, and Dabi was a smart butt motherfucker. He was tired of it because F dash. He groans as he leaned on his throne, and he looked ahead of him, seeing Dabi and Toga mess with a goblin. The snake woman was holding him up in the air, and Dabi was trying to cook the thing. What are you doing? He hissed, scratching his neck. Cooking, Toga sang happily as she threw the goblin through the glass window. Shiggy, why do you have that frown on your face? You're going to get more wrinkles, she says, and Tamura rolled his eyes, sitting up straight, and he looks at him. I have big things to deal with, like maybe I don't know what I am going to do with all those heroic assholes trying to ruin everything, and he's with them no less, so we can't just go for it, he says as he rubbed his eyes, and Dabi hummed. The kid is just going through a rebellious phase, Dabi says. Kurogyri babysat him. Brats do this, he says as he looks at him, and Kurogyri, who was cleaning up the broken glass, sighed as he looks at them, and he nodded his head. No, he thinks he is doing the right thing. The master decided to keep him around humans so he has their beliefs. It will take a while for him to see he is wrong. He is a good boy. He will come around, he says, and he looks at them. And he may not forgive us for a while, he might call us monsters, but he will see what master has set out for him, he says. You just have a soft spot, Dabi says, and Kurogyri shrugged. He couldn't say no.